All right, welcome back, Joint Appropriations Committee, back from lunch. The time is 1:19. Again, we're a few minutes late. We are live and recording, so we are good to go. I see the chief is here with us. Great to see you here this afternoon. Chief of Staff Drew Perkins, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We're happy to be today on this agenda item. We were just going to give you an update on the reorganization of ETS. We appreciate that opportunity. We've got obviously here Director Bach and TR over here to talk about our CIO can fill you in on that. But ultimately, we're just in the process of continuing our listening sessions. We've completed listening sessions and reaching out to the directors of any agency who would talk to us about that. Invitations were extended to all directors to do that. TR set up a series of hearings. We've had Director Bach, a number of members. We've got a kind of a working group advisory board that we put together that have that I'll let Director Bach take you through those. But we've got both people inside and outside of government and some even in the private IT sector to advise us on this as to go through this. So we've been having that working group has been extended, and not everybody's attended all listening sessions, but everybody's been on at least some. We've had a few meetings there. We're just in the process now of having completed the listening sessions with the directors. We're now starting the listening sessions with ETS employees, which we had one this morning. And so we're in the process of listening to that. We've come to no conclusions and have no recommendations about what that should look like at this point. We're still just gathering information, trying to make sure we identify the problems and the challenges that are there. And at the end of the day, we're just as the governor wanted to do, we're trying to come out of this with an ETS that's effective, that provides a great career path and a great working environment, but and just as importantly, if not more importantly, provides the professional and IT services that we need across the enterprise. So with that, I'll turn it over to Director Bach and then TR. I'm having a brain lock on your last name. Sheehan, thank you. Director Sheehan will CIO Sheehan can fill you in. Well, Sheehan, like Shillelagh. Yeah. All right.
This would be my co-chairman.
So it's an age thing. These names just go away all of a sudden.
And we're gonna take a tip from you, and we're just gonna listen right now. So Director Bach, if you would.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. My name is Patricia Bach. I am A&I Director. And as the chief had indicated, we have a task force, advisory panel, whatever we want to call it. I want to go through those names so that you guys have an understanding of who. I think you'll know most of them. Obviously, the Chief of Staff, Drew Perkins, myself, Tim Sheehan. Robin Cooley from DWS is on there to kind of represent the directors and the agencies. Jackie Childress, who I think you all know, was also involved as a CFO for both ITD and ETS. So she went through the consolidation as the CFO. We have John Wood, who is Central Wyoming College CIO, also on the task force. We have UW Business College Associate Dean Ron Wood. Nope, that's not right. Ron Smith. John Wood is the CIO. I always go to Ron Wood because of music. So, and then Andrea Byrne. She was obviously working with the Secretary of State for years. She's now in the private sector, and we also have her on the task force as well. As the chief indicated, we did some listening sessions with the directors, got a lot of information on what's going well and maybe what ETS can do better, just like any other agency can do better. And then we're in the middle of small group sessions with the employees at ETS. They're going well, probably not long enough. There's a lot of discussion, good discussion about what they believe went well with consolidation, what they think maybe needs to be addressed. So we are in that process right now, listening each one of them. We are doing most of them over Zoom because it's easier that way for the smaller groups. We've had a couple large meetings with the governor, with the ETS folks in the beginning prior to the listening sessions, kind of giving his idea of the direction of ETS. So that's kind of where we are. And we can take any questions that you want, and TR can clean up my remarks if needed.
Mr. Sheehan?
Madam Chair, my name is TR Sheehan, the interim CIO for the state of Wyoming. And I think the chief and Director Bott covered most well. The listening sessions, I think, they've gone good. Sometimes it's tough sitting in them when I get to hear some of the not so good, but it's also good to hear that as well on how we can improve our services in the future. But for the most part, it's been some fairly positive comments, and it's been, I think, eye-opening for the work group and the different folks in the listening sessions, hearing different perspectives. So hearing some of the challenges the agency directors may have versus some of the challenges the staff may experience. So we're looking forward to how we can, bridge the gap on that as well, and let each other see each other's side.
Questions at this point from the committee regarding the listening sessions? All right, what's the timeline and where do you think this is going to go, Director Bach?
Madam Chair, I do believe that, and I told LSO the same, that I think we will have a lot more to go on for your fall meeting. Depending on what comes out of the task force and how that looks, I would hope that we would have significant progress to either report or even possibly have a bill at that point or something drafted.
So that means we'll get the draft bill prior to the day before the new session.
You don't need to respond to that.
Well, actually, I was just going to correct you
Again,
and say
the chairman.
it wasn't part of the day before session. It was the afternoon prior to the deadline for bill submissions in the general session. So it's even worse. It was even worse than Mr. Chairman suggested. But yes, hopefully it'll be sooner so we can have a better talk about that. I think a couple of things that have been interesting that we have found so far that I might share with you, if I may, Madam Chairman, and that is that of course, for all of us, our perception is our reality, but we've done a number of things as we've gone through this to compile information that shows that there is some misperception out there versus reality. And one of those that I think is just worthy reporting to this committee, Madam Chairman, is that it's about a 98%, 95%, anyway, 90 odd percent satisfaction rate with response times of directors to ETS. So they've done a number of surveys that gone out. And so the day-to-day stuff where, the computer doesn't work, software is down, something like that happens. It's a very high, it's a 90-some% satisfaction rate. And Director Sheehan could elaborate on that for just a minute if he would.
Director.
Madam Chair. So we do have on our website posted real-time stats, and it's a 30-day rollback period. So it does update every day and give you current statistics. And I can report out of the almost 4,000 tasks that our staff has handled in the past month, it's an 89.x% satisfaction rate. And then, we do have, some customers who we probably could have done better with, and our dissatisfied rate's about 1-point-something% right now. And the rest are kind of left in the middle of somewhat satisfied. So I think it really does go to show the level of dedication of our staff and the effort they are putting in to ensure that our agencies are well taken care of.
All right. Thank you, Director. You hit us at the right time, right after lunch. So it should be a pretty easy, I think, moment for you. Just to go back through that timeline, if you are anticipating the committee to adopt a bill draft, we'll need to do that before our third meeting. If we're going to do it properly, and I know that's not the House way, but it is the Senate way. And so we will want it in anticipation of that, so it can be a formally adopted committee bill through the proper process. Director Bach?
Madam Chair, I understand that, and I think we would keep you in the loop on how the task force is going. We can keep the chairs in the loop and LSO on how that's going and where we are.
All right. Representative Larson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Director Balk. Further on that discussion, so I'm pleased to hear that we'll have that next in our next meeting. My question is then, are you anticipating addressing the staff comments and providing some recommendations on that? I would prefer that the task force address that, come back with a fairly clean bill draft recommendation, rather than have that conversation here. But I don't know how the chairman feels.
So Director Chief, we do have the bill draft from the last session, anticipating that you are going to modify that in some way in light of all of these listening sessions you're having and evaluating a better way forward.
No.
Do you anticipate adopting a similar version to the bill draft that's currently as part of our materials? Or that's just going to be amended? Or do you think something entirely differently? Do you have a sense of that now?
The answer is it's just too early to tell, to be frankly honest. I mean, the promise that the governor made to ETS was that we do a ground up. And so, and that's quite frankly, one of the reasons we reached out when we saw the bill draft up for discussion was we thought it would actually send the wrong message that we had come to conclusions already when that's not the case. And so, I mean, there has been numerous ways that we've already talked about how this might look. There's a number of variations. There's, we've talked about an HRD model where you kind of have embedded and not embedded folks that serve that. We've talked about having a separate CIO's office and that deals with cybersecurity and planning and systems planning and having that robust and separate, and then having the day-to-day services in A&I. We've talked about, and there's other variations on those themes. And so at this point, it's just too early, and I think conveys a wrong message to the promise that the governor made to the employees at ETS to say that it would look this way or that way.
Thank you, Chief. Questions from the committee? And just for a point of clarity or one from the chief too, we have you slotted for an hour of time. Doesn't appear like we're going to need that time, but know that we probably will need significant time for the state compensation piece of the agenda, Director Bach, of which you're up next for. So committee, we'll avoid the need to fill time. Right, so you might be being compelled to ask questions that may not be appropriate right now or not ready for. But with that, Representative Stiff.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Chief of Staff or Mr. Sheehan, what can you tell us about the executive order for the establishment of the Cyber Assistance Response Effort Team from last month?
Director Sheehan.
Madam Chair, Representative Stiff. So last month, the governor did formalize the Cyber Assistance Response Effort Team. That is a multi-agency, both within state government, federal government, that allows us to better partner both with our public peers, state and local government entities, and with those private industry individuals that could use our assistance in the event of a response to a cyber event. So it's similar to what we've testified before and how we've assisted other higher education or county facilities who've experienced some challenges. It just puts in place formally the agreement that we can all work together and provide that assistance. And I would also add, and I will throw her on the spot because she's sitting behind me, but we do have Director Budd here from the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security that could add any context if I did miss anything.
Representative Henderson.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I don't expect an answer right now, but as we go through this interim, I sure would appreciate information on, you're talking about the manpower piece, but I'm also interested in the technology shifts and the incorporation of the results from the care and those kind of things as we go into the budget session. Not just to tee it up, but to carry us through the next, 4 or 5 years. I think that could add up. Wouldn't you agree?
Director Sheehan.
Madam Chair, Representative Henderson, I would agree. And as we go through, I think some of the recommendations we'll have for the upcoming budget session, we can cover that.
All right, any final questions? Seeing none, this topic is, our public comment, any public comment? No public comment. Seeing none, this topic's closed. Director Bach, if you can just stay where you are. Committee, I do hope to move through this afternoon. If you remember, we may want to circle back to our topic yesterday morning of major maintenance and some of the concepts that we can move forward. So want to maybe reserve time at the end of the day for some of those concepts. So you may not get out of here as early as you think because we're trucking ahead on this. So with that, we will move on to our 2:00 agenda item at 1:35 of state employee compensation. Director Bach.
Madam Chair, again, excuse me, Patricia Bach, A&I Director. I'm here with Aaron Williams, who probably will have the bulk of your information. We're here to answer any questions. Our understanding was that there were some questions on employee comp, and we stand ready to answer those questions. And I can give you an update. Obviously, the compensation, we're in the middle of getting that uploaded and everything out for the next paycheck. So we don't have a lot of detail information. If that's what we're looking for, it would be after the July, the month of July, and we can get that information to you as well. I just wanted to tee that up to say that we're kind of in the middle of the end of that compensation.
Co-Chairman Nicholas, Senator Kinsky, you have questions for the Department of A&I concerning employee compensation? You're prepared to ask some of those?
So, Mr. Co-Chair, during the luncheon break, I had a chance to talk with the director regarding our earlier conversations with the head of DEQ, and also the chief of staff was part of that conversation. I think they have a potential remedies for at least one or two of those air quality positions that where there are means to do it, funds available, and it's basically a kind of a reprogramming of classification of certain positions, which kind of answered my concern. Because you may recall, I said we ought to get these folks all in one room and talk about it this morning. And I think that we're 2 or 3 steps away from accomplishing that right now. So.
Well, Co-Chairman, that sounds great. Let's bring the committee on board and the rest of the public. I see Director Parfit outside and the chief. Let's bring them back in. We'll have that conversation here and understand what the plan might be.
And Coach, I think that's a good idea, but also it's an educational component to teach us more about how your operation works. Because one of the reasons that, and I'm probably for a little background information, Trish, I think it'd be useful for you to kind of tell us how you establish your pay scales and the system that you use and how it works and how you. So we understand when we say, gosh, these people need to make more money, how do you do it? And what's the process?
So we're going to take this time just for the committee to discuss very pointedly. We'll hear from Director Bach. For those of you that don't know in the committee, that state employees are on a pay scale. Should briefly go over that census based on market analysis and other factors to establish a pay scale. So our state employees are paid appropriately. But currently we have this pending kind of urgent need coming out of DEQ associated with the air quality division. And so my understanding is over lunch, as we heard from the co-chair, some solutions are being identified. So Director, if you could come sit at the table, Chief, if you could come sit at the table, we're going to have a public conversation about what those plans may be and what that's going to look like big picture. Make sure we don't establish maybe some unprecedented precedents associated with an urgent need and then we upset the apple cart, or we all understand what's happening and why. So Director Bach, with that, if you just want to give us a broad overview generally of why public employees or the state employees are on a pay band scale.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. I'm going to turn most of that conversation over to Erin Williams because she has the ability to answer those questions. one of the things we spoke about during break is that there is an issue with the air quality division. A few positions that are hard to fill. And they're hard to fill not only here, but they were hard to fill apparently down in Colorado. So the pay that they are able to get in Colorado is 15,000, 20,000 less than what they can get here. And more, sorry, more than what they can get here. One of the things we have when we discuss the pay scale is we have premiums. So if we identify a position or a classification that is a premium, we can do an add-on to that outside of what the market numbers appear to show. So for example, the market shows where we are right now in 2022. Sometimes that's not appropriate. A good way to look at that is nurses. Sometimes we have to do a premium on nurses because we can't get nurses at the rate we're paying. So we can do the same thing with air quality. And I'll turn it over to Erin Williams to kind of explain that.
Madam Chair, Erin Williams, Human Resources Division. As you guys are fully aware, in 2015, we hired the Hay Consulting firm to walk us through an overall review of our compensation and classification practices. So for the classification system, we use the Hay methodology of job classification. And from what I understand from the speaking with my staff, Director Parfit's team has gone through that first initial review to see if we have a classification issue in that structure. We identify sometimes maybe a new level is needed to be created, or maybe we've under-evaluated new duties have been added. And so sometimes it's as simple as adjusting the classification. Other times we find the classification is appropriate, but there's something that's going on the compensation side with the market. And then that's when we'll work with Megan Connor and the compensation team to go through exactly the exercise that Director Bach mentioned. We will look at our market methodology that we currently have in place in our compensation philosophy. We now do regression analysis. So if a job is scored at a pay grade O, all the jobs in pay grade O are put into a regression analysis and we aggregate that data. But if we're having a specific situation, say with hydrographers or a very specific occupational family, we'll pull out that specific occupational group. We'll do a mini study. We'll do a pricing sheet and we'll see what's going on in that market. Maybe we're not benchmarking at the appropriate level, or maybe we've missed the mark on the pay grade that we have. So that's the process that the team, I think, is working on currently with Director Parfit. I think we've identified that it's probably more of a compensation issue than it is classification. We haven't determined at this point, from what I understand from my staff, if we, have that in the wrong pay grade, if it's a premium position or what that looks like. And so then, just depending on what our analysis shows, there's a couple different options that we can take. Like Director Bach said, it might come up as a premium position. Now in our initial review, that those positions have not come up in the past. And so I'm doubting that the premium pay is what it is, but we might just be paying too low in our ranges. Or, there's additional duties that have been giving and maybe an add-ons necessary. So there's a couple different ways that we look at those issues and try to resolve it. And we'll take a really thorough look. We don't want to do just a Band-Aid fix. We know for recruiting and retention, it's important that we thoroughly analyze that and come up with a long-term solution.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Erin, how long does that exercise take? How long does that exercise take?
I'm not sure, and I'm getting some information from my staff. So I know they've done the classification review. It usually just is, getting us in the room. It takes a couple weeks to get the survey out to our other states. We have the compensation methodology. Co-chair Nicholas had kind of asked, the survey sources we use. The data is there. So it's as simple as Megan Connor pulling out the benchmark matches that we have in that occupational family, and she can put together a pricing sheet for us fairly quickly on that. So the turnaround time is pretty quick usually on this.
Well,
How long does that exercise take?
Chairman Nicholas, I would say, within a couple weeks, we'd have the pricing sheets done and a recommendation and a path for moving forward.
Thank you.
further questions about the process? Seeing none, Director Parfit, comments?
Thank you, Chairwoman Nethercott.
Yeah, I would say the way we're looking at it is there are two paths to take, as Administrator Williams mentioned. Is there's one, which is a longer process of looking at are they appropriately classified? That's a longer term exercise. What we talked about earlier this morning was if we had additional funding from the 100 series, which we may have, we could make the critical need positions budgeted at the midpoint for their range. And that would come at a cost of what we figured of $1 million for the biennium or 500,000 a year. And so if we're looking at it for this year, we would have sufficient funds in the 100 series that would be reverted at the end of the biennium, that we could cover that cost, I believe. We're sitting at about 600,000 if all the positions were filled tomorrow. So there's going to be more than $600,000 available for the rest of this biennium to, if we chose to do that.
Chief?
I think that's, you know, if you think about it, I mean, what we've done particularly with the second phase of the compensation program, we funded vacancies to 90% of MPP. So there's a number of vacancies that exist within the air quality division that are there. So, and they're not going to be filled. And so there's going to be adequate, I mean, there's more than enough money appropriated there to take care of this. What will happen though is obviously you have to take some money off of some of the vacant positions that aren't there and move it in. That should show up in the Chapter 17 reconciliation. And so there's enough money to do that. That will be a divergence from the Chapter 17 reconciliation, which can bring stern rebukes from this joint committee. But if we do it because you told us to, then we would expect much less of a severe rebuke when we come back and for our hearings in the session, if that makes sense.
It does, Chief, and I appreciate that and this opportunity to kind of bring this out so that there is more comfort amongst the committee about what this process looks like and why it may be happening. So DEQ is not feeling some burn come December. So further comments or questions from the committee? Representative Larson?
Oh, go ahead.
So I guess I just want a little clarification or closure, if I may, Madam Chairman, on this conversation between DEQ and ANI. So if I understand again, the root problem is we're not able to fill those positions because of funding. You have funding available due to the vacancies and stuff that are there. You just need a blessing here that says you can increase the offer, the pay scale for that, and then we adjust it on the budget.
Director Bach?
Is that correct? Have I got this right?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, I believe so. My understanding is that the range is there to get to where DEQ needs to get to. They can hire up to MPP of their classification without any exception. If they go over MPP, they have to ask for an exception to go over MPP, and that's just paperwork.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Do we have provisions for a signing bonus?
Can you repeat that, Representative Henderson?
Do we have provisions for a signing bonus?
Madam Chair, Representative Henderson, yes, we have recently made some changes to our compensation policies to include additional tools for agencies to address the recruiting and retention. Sign-on bonus is one of those, as are the moving expenses.
Further questions? Chief?
Madam Chairman. If I can I just wanted to clarify on one issue. So the good Representative Larson, Madam Chairman, referred to as a funding issue, and it's actually there's adequate funding there. It's just there are some of them have been imposed by the legislature about where and how you move money and what that looks like. And so significant number of the hurdles have been set up to put in place rules that help implement direction that the legislature's given. So the fact that it seems a little bit cumbersome over here is in large part because there's a number, some of them are some of the footnotes that have been traditionally now in the budget for a number of years, and trying to honor the legislature's direction in that. We've created these internal safeguards to make sure that those things don't happen. And so if it seems a little bit clunky, it is, but that's in order to make sure that we've complied with direction given to us by the Joint Appropriations.
So.
Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Madam Co-Chair, yeah, we want you to declunkify this for the DEQ.
Well, that's what the co-chair has asked. I want to provide you the greatest level of transparency and protection to avoid misinformation or direction from one legislator that then comes back to bite you later. And so this process here and bringing you back in to discuss it is intended to allow for this committee's participation in this process, quite frankly, to protect you from allegations of doing what you're not typically legislatively authorized to do and bucking this committee. I know the Senate historically takes that position, that that's what state agencies do. And I want to just provide some transparency and support for that process. And so if there's any objections to that now, I would like to hear from this committee now before we send them on a circus adventure to then feel our wrath later. So if there's any criticisms or concerns about that now, I certainly think now would be appropriate to air those. Representative Larson.
So with the good chief's comments, I'd like to clarify my previous question. So within the Series 100, we have adequate funding to accomplish what we're not going to be moving funds from 900 up or any place else. It's within Series 100. Is that accurate?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, I would say that is true because of the fact that we had the vacancies.
Right. Right. And then that, Madam Chairman, and then that warrants then the adjustment in the standard budget, because we're just adjusting it now until, and we're going to have to account for that in our standard budget in that same 100 series.
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, if I understand your point on that, yes, this would be a interim measure that would then have to be incorporated into the standard budget the next biennium.
So, Madam Co-Chair, Todd, how many actual number of vacancies do you have
In air quality or total?
in total?
So Madam Chair, Representative Nicholas, right now we have 33 vacancies.
33?
Agency-wide, 18 of those vacancies are in air quality.
And so, I mean, how many folks do you need immediately just to get out of your backlog issues? If you could, if they were available.
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Nicholas, for air quality, 18.
That's all?
Well, of the vacancies.
Yeah, no. And so how long have they been vacant? So in other words, how much money do you have in coffers? Is that the 600,000 roughly?
Madam Chair, Representative Nicholas, yeah, the 600,000 it would be what's available because of agency-wide, no, I'm sorry, air quality vacancies, provided that all the positions were filled tomorrow. If they stayed vacant, that number would, by the end of the biennium, be over 1 million.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 2 quick questions. I guess I'd like to understand why we have such vacancies in air quality. What precipitates that? And then secondly, what is the salary range for those positions that you haven't filled? What are you expecting the salaries to be to attract people to fill those particular vacancies?
Director.
So, Madam Chair, Senator Salazar, the reason or the root cause of the issue with the vacancies is that there are projected over the next year, 70 new EPA rules that will be final. There are several others that have recently passed that we're incorporating now into our processes. There is a lot of activity as a result of the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. So all of those contribute to the added pressure, not just on Wyoming, but all states that I talk to have the same issue, is that we're all competing for the same resource. There are more and more demands put on those specialties across the country in all the states and at EPA. So that's pretty much the why. And the vacancy rate that we're experiencing is that those that we're competing with, states of the Region 8 states, in particular Utah and Colorado, and Region 8 EPA, along with the industry representatives who are also looking to implement these new federal requirements. The collective of that puts us into a difficult position if we can't compete on the salary front. So as far as the range goes and the expectations, I can tell you what the average is for each of these positions. They range from the entry-level positions, ranges from 56,000 a year to as we were talking about, the senior level engineers. Right now, the average is between 90 and 97,000. And that, when you compare that to the MPP, or the mid-range, as I call it, which I think is a little more than the mid-range, there is quite a gap there, because most of the positions are pretty close to the 90% of market.
We can blame the feds, Senator Salazar. Further questions from the committee? Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Bach, this is really more of an enterprise-wide question on vacancies and filling of positions. And that is, when somebody retires or leaves an agency and they have been there 10, 15, 20 years, they have significant time that they're owed. And there's really no place in that agency's budget that is to pay off a retiring employee, I'd say. And it works well early in the biennium when there is plenty of money in the 100 series. It does not work as well later in the biennium. We've discussed this in the past. What are some ideas you might have as to how, on an enterprise-wide system, we can address that? Because if an agency has to leave a position open 4 months, 5 months, 6 months to pay off the previous holder of it, the work still needs done. And that's not good for the services to the people of Wyoming if they can't fill the position and the work is not being completed. So the question is, what are some solutions as to enterprise-wide, how we can address this, paying off the retirement factors of retiring employees or employees that are leaving for any reason, without hindering the ability of that agency to do its service function, serve the people of Wyoming?
Mr. Hibbard.
Madam Chairman, thank you. We had this conversation a couple different times in the budget shortage years. We asked for an appropriation of $500,000. Now we're experiencing these vacancies. Right now, we probably anticipate about $60 million of general funds reverting. 60 million, because this is an enterprise problem we have. Compensation, we hope that that's going to improve with the compensation package. But what we do now is we do not expect the agencies to wait. If they have an issue, get with HR, A&I, or the state budget department, we'll facilitate that. And we also have the ability, which we always do, is we will run the budgets to see if anybody's in harm's way. If they are in harm's way, or they say they don't believe they will be, we will facilitate that by moving the necessary money, adjusting it accordingly to Section 310 or 329. But the expectation is not to allow those agencies to have to go past the normal process of replacing a position because they're paying out unproductive time, which is vacation or sick leave. Will facilitate, and that's on testimony the last time Joint Appropriations Committee met. I said the very same things. We do not want to hesitate. We have already a systemic problem with vacancies. We don't need to infuriate that.
Director Bach, do you want to answer the question too? Do you want anything to add?
Madam Chair, I think Director Hibbert explained it well, that what we've been talking about. The hardest problem is when we have an agency that's small. They don't have the vacancies. So that's what Director Hibbert and ANI HRD have worked through. So if you look at Director Hibbert's agency, it's a very small agency. If he has no vacancies, he has no 100 series to pay off when somebody leaves. So that's what the budget department is working on. The budget agency is working on. So I think we have a pretty good handle on it, but I caution because we're in an era where we have a lot of vacancies. If we get to an era where everything's full and everybody's looking for a job, we could run into that problem again.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Hibbert, so UB11 that, is that what you do to the agency, and from whence does that money come?
Mr. Chairman, in specificity, there was 2 agencies that found themselves in harm's way last year. We did do a B11. Fortunately, the state auditor's office had used federal funds, ARPA dollars, when they didn't use their general funds. So they actually had general funds that were available that we transferred to those other 2 agencies to help them out with that particular issue. And again, we will continue to monitor this, and even for the small agencies at the tail or the approach to the last quarter of the biennium or the last 1/8 of the biennium, we decide we will run those reports and see that nobody remains in harm's way for this particular purpose.
Follow up. Thank you, Madam Chairman. So in the scenario where we have no vacancies and have all of these retirements and we find ourselves in that situation, would it be helpful as we do similar like a section 300 to have access to, if there aren't funds agency wide, do that to give the budget or the governor access to LSRA or something to cover that?
Mr. Chairman, we did ask for a few years ago, $500,000 of flexibility. We made that request. Another option would be we'd monitor this, and if we had somebody in harm's way, we'd ask for an effective immediate for the last 1/8 of the biennium. I mean, there's a lot of ways to manage this, but it would be helpful. And we once upon a time did, when I first took over this job, we actually had a pot of money on the side. But when we ran into the 17 era, remember the reduction of, volatility of mineral wealth, we gave that up for that purpose. But there's a multitude of ways of addressing this. But if we found ourselves in a situation where we needed your assistance, we would certainly be here in a conversation with the Joint Appropriations Committee, and we could seek an effective immediate or an appropriation of, say, funding for effective immediate or specificity to a particular agency.
So, Madam Co-Chair. So did you expend the $500,000?
You did not give it to us.
We
We
did.
asked for it, you denied it.
Well, why don't you ask for it again?
Mr. Chairman, can I have $500,000?
And when was that $500,000 asked for?
I believe it was in the prior biennium, so it would have been a request, I believe, for
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Representative Larson.
And I appreciate, and I know that we've done the effective immediate and done some stuff like that, but I think as we find people wanting transparency, if we identify that ahead of time and make that clear, so we might just contemplate that as we go into the budget session as either ask for an appropriation for that again, or to give you access to funds in the event that that happens. And then we don't come back and say, well, why didn't they ask for that? Or we're doing B11. So just food from my perspective.
Madam Chairwoman, that's all really good advice, and we accept that advice.
Madam Chair.
Very smart answer. Chief?
And I think it's just important for all the committees of all the members of the committee to recognize that is about a $60 million unfunded liability that does not appear. I don't think it appears in the AFRA, or it doesn't appear anybody else, but it is basically an unfunded liability that's out there at any given time. And so, I don't think you would want to appropriate and hold that money off to do that. But I mean, there's a number of ways that you could go about making sure that in any given year, you've got it. You have adequate money. And it's certainly when we're in times of, like it's already been said, when you're in time where you have high vacancies, there's plenty of 100 series that's available to move around inside the enterprise to take care of that. But if we come to where that gets tighter, then that becomes much more of a problem. And that's, which has already been said, but I just wanted to make sure that folks, that is a real, I mean, that's accrued leave and accrued sick leave for employees that has been accrued on the books, never taken. But if they leave or retire, then they're due that money.
Madam Co-Chair.
Co-Chairman?
Just to follow up then on our previous conversation, if you have 35 roughly vacant positions, it would be interesting to know what that is costing us in terms of revenue to the state in one fashion or another. Because the more that we understand that, the more I think the executive branch, as well as A&I and the legislature, all of us will say, we're doing something wrong. Because if by having those 35 positions full, we would be having greater production of minerals and development and all those things that are the benefit of what you're supposed to do. And it's a big deal, but we need to be able to quantify it, and we need to be able to react more swiftly if possible to accommodate, particularly an agency like yours that you're basically a gatekeeper to those things. And so it's just, to me, it just makes sense that we take a deep dive on that to understand it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Senator Guru.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Okay. I understand what we're trying to do, and it's all, as many things are, best of intentions. We've got a problem, and we've got a problem in DEQ, and we're working to solve it. My question is, and this is kind of goes back to the little discussion we were having about some on our side of the building get a little nervous about these things. It's like, do you see an unintended consequence? Example, we just went across the enterprise the last 2 years doing market adjustments, trying to bring everyone up to market and as close as we can. The governor's asked us, and the legislature has responded. So now we're going to fill these vacant positions and aggressively try to fill them and reclassify and adjust. So now that once that's done, tomorrow or next week, after those next round of paychecks goes out, so we can start answering these questions, are we going to create an unintended consequence whereby people in another department in the same pay band that was previously air quality folks in DEQ all going to rise up and give a call to A&I and say, hey, wait a minute, I'd like to get in on this deal, or their department heads. And then if that call comes, that's where sometimes folks, at least that I've heard talk on our side of the aisle, go, that's why we don't take money and put it in Series 100 and just let it go to B11 or whatever. So help me with that, just in case somebody asks.
Madam Chair.
Director.
I will try to answer that. And that is a question that comes up every day. And one of the things I try to remind directors is that the directors in each agency have their budget that they can pay within that pay band. We ran into a few years ago, Director Hibbard can also comment on this, where we had an agency who was consistently paying at 80%. So they would hire them in at 80%. And then complain that they couldn't hire anybody because their hiring rate was so low. They have the ability to pay at MPP, and they probably could have. So that's where we're trying to work, and the chief of staff was instrumental in getting that lower pay band to 90. So we are not looking at anything below 90 right now. We used to be 20% on each side of MPP. So I would say that the directors, the agencies have their own budget and can work within that budget. And if DEQ can pay MPP for air quality and a pay band P, ANI may or may not be able to pay in a pay band P, which may not be, it's not going to be an air quality person, but it could be a manager in procurement. So we wouldn't be able to maybe pay MPP, but that is exactly how that is supposed to work. So I can see where your concern is on if we say that's why we put premiums on positions or things like that, to say this is a premium position. This is why we're going to allow this to happen, to where you can take some of the 100 series money, work on chapter 17 for DEQ. I'm not about to say that there's not 5 other agencies that are listening right now thinking this, I want to do the same thing. And I agree with you. So, but there are premium positions in air quality. Given what you've heard here today, I think we're in a dire situation for that. It sounds like it. And I think Aaron has additional comments as well.
Madam Chair, Senator Guru, I think this is the problem that the Human Resources Division grapples with all the time. We really want to help each agency when they find themselves in these recruiting and retention situations. However, our job is also to look at other agencies across the enterprise and maintain equity. And so as a part of our review, absolutely, I think there are other agencies we're working with PSC in relation to some of their engineers that they have. We're struggling 20 to 23% turnover in all of our engineering and natural resource positions. Definitely, we're hearing as of the last increases and what we're expecting to give this July, that's helping. We're getting more qualified candidates, but we're still struggling. We've increased the minimum qualifications with the Hayes study. So the state wants to hire the most qualified individuals we can. We're requiring engineers in training at our lowest level. We're requiring PE engineers for all of our engineering levels, but we're paying below the market policy position of those. And so we can't afford, PE engineers at the salaries that we've been paying. And we've come great strides the last 2 years. I think we're situating ourselves where we need to be. I would reference you guys back to the compensation fact booklet we put together at the beginning of our phase 2 ask. On page 58, there's an example of the compa ratios and where the salaries were for DEQ. And we broke it out by years of service. And so I think it's exactly what Director Bach had said. Less than 5 years, their employees were at 86.6% of market. With the adjustments we're giving, nobody will be below 90%. And we're getting closer to that sweet spot. What we hear from all of our agencies is if we could just get to that market policy position, that seems to be that sweet spot. So that's what we've been working for the past 2 years, and we're getting there. So hopefully this will help. In regards to Senator Guru's concern, our staff will look at equity. And so another agency we would look at is PSC, and their compa ratios are higher than where the Department of Environmental Quality positions were. So we will take that into consideration as we're making these adjustments, and we'll make sure that there's equity and parity in those positions as best as we can. And so that's, we know that the DEQ positions were drastically lower than some of the other agencies who had engineers. And so that's a piece of the review that's been taken into consideration, but you guys can see those in that fact booklet as well.
Thank you, Senator Gru.
Just one follow-up. And I know you can't, I've heard you when you say we're just going out with these, and we're just starting to take a look across the enterprise, how this last round of pay raises went towards the market. And actually, I was one of the ones that asked for this subject to be on here because of whether it's at our next meeting or whenever I'd ask our chairman, we get a report on that. How are we doing in comparison to market? Because, and it goes back to just what we were talking about. If we're going to go back to where we were 3 years ago, where the director, you all come in and say, we're losing people, and so we have to give these, they're walking out the door bonuses to keep them in the door. And then and some of us will have some splaining to do down on the floor because, we sold this out on the floor to our fellow senators as we're getting her to market. So if we're not there, we need to know how far we are, where we need to go from here. And so as we go forward, I'll be looking for that. And like I say, you can't answer it all now. So I'll let you know.
Chief?
Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If I can just kind of weigh in on the good senator's question. I think that what I'm hearing from directors across the enterprise is this is making a big difference. But keep in mind, it just went into effect on July 1. So those amounts are just now going to start hitting the pay, but it's making a difference. I know I've heard from a number of directors, it's stopped a lot of people were waiting to see what would happen, and they did not walk out the door because of this happened. So we've saved some there. We're still, but it is still an estimate. As we've gone through this, you raise to market, but in some cases, the market doesn't quite work in the local area. We're finding with water quality, we're finding with nurses, apparently with some attorneys, with some other things. There are some places where we're still not, for some reason, competitive. And so we're starting this process where you work through with all that. But one thing that's I think right on topic with the good senator's question is part of the problem is exactly the way that we budget. And so when we have we came back and we asked, and this committee agreed, and the legislature approved that we would fund these vacancies to 90% of market. And that was an increase. We used to fund those at 80% of market. But if we couldn't hire anybody at 80% of market, what's the point of funding things at 80% of market? So we moved it up to 90% of market. But what happens when you have a filled position, it goes in, and that's what the budget is at, is that the filled position, what that salary is paid. And so unless the legislature grants an ability or a raise of some sort, it becomes very, very difficult to do anything within the pay band. We've got a pay band now that runs from 90% of market to 120% of market. That's the pay band. But when it's budgeted at whatever the exact amount is, there is no flexibility. There's no ability to work with people and engage people like you would in the private sector to find out and say, well, I can't do this, but maybe I could do that. And so we run into this thing where we're budgeted at this number. We have people who have other offers. It's hard to find a way to match that offer in many instances. If you're a larger agency and you have some vacancies, you have more ability to do that. If you're a small agency and don't have vacancies, or you need that position that is vacant, you have no ability to do that. And so one of the things that we all ought to also think about is how do we provide this opportunity so that you can, as a part of the retention of people, provide some flexibility within the pay band so that directors have the ability to meet and match offers, staying within the classification pay band. But to do that, otherwise it becomes a large financial exercise with the state budget and HRD to find some way to do that. And speaking of clunky, that really clunkifies the system.
Declunk. Mr. Hibbert?
Madam Chairwoman, just so we understand that there is flexibility in the budget to facilitate what we're discussing here with DEQ today. First of all, there's Section 310, which requires an agency across bienniums at the same level of general fund across the agency. It's not division related. They can actually cross the agency, cross divisions with their salaries. The second provision that was provided this year was Section 310B, which allows us up to $8 million for us to be able to use vacancy savings at least 90%. So again, there's a second provision there that allows us to facilitate the DEQ or other things of this nature in the budget.
Further questions? All right. Any public comment? Representative Larson?
So if we're, just want to make sure that we're kind of done with the DEQ conversation. Director Balk, I just have a request, if I could, maybe for me, if you could just provide me with, I think you classify like directors and senior administrators level number 4 and number 3. Would you mind providing me a list of those directors and senior administrators in there?
Madam Chair, I think you're talking about the EX band 1 through 8.
Yeah,
And
I think that's right.
We can submit that to the committee as a whole.
Please.
And one thing I would like, Madam Chair, I will tell you that I have received, and I know Aaron Williams has received multiple emails thanking the executive branch, the governor, the chief, us, and the legislature for the last 2 years pay raises. It has done significant, we have moved significantly in keeping people where they are. So I just want to collectively say thank you from employees.
And Madam Chairman, I would, if I may, I would just say for those few anomalies that we had to tweak up in my neck of the woods, you know, that was all very smooth too. And thank you for your agency. And we couldn't, that was a big lift and there was bound to be a few that slipped through the cracks and you'd address those very well. Thank you.
All right, with that, we'll go to public comment on this topic.
Before they leave the table, I have a quick request,
Senator
and I'm not sure who else was A&I or the governor's office. But we funded weekend opening at the Capitol, and one of the docents is very enthusiastic about the number of visitors we've received. Could I just get just maybe a half page in terms of what we usually get on an average day and what we're getting on the weekends, and keep us updated on the Sunday visitation as well? I know it's off topic, but I didn't want them to get away.
Madam Chair, it's been very well received. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, last Saturday was very close to 200 visitors on that Saturday. And we're open at the same hours as the museum. And it's working very well. So I think it was a good, it's definitely helped with traffic, and we have people that are covering. The docents are doing a great job, and I can get you that as well on every Saturday that we work with.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, Wyoming State Museum Master Plan. Director Ramler.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman. I'm Sarah Sheen. I'm the Deputy Director for the Cultural Resources Division. And with me is Kevin Ramler, the Director of the State Museum. And just want to say thank you for putting us on as an agenda item today. We're really happy to be here to give you an update on the Level 1, Level 2 study that was funded by the legislature and has just reached completion. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin to give you a brief update, and then we'll take questions.
Director, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kevin Ramler, Director of the State Museum. As Deputy Director Sheen said, we just wrapped up the Level 1, Level 2 study on the museum facility needs. It was delivered at the end of last month. And so I just was asked to provide kind of a high-level summary of what was found and recommended from that study. So we want to look a little bit at the evaluation of the current facilities, public survey data, benchmarking, conceptual design, and the site analysis. So the design team, after examining a number of potential sites, kind of narrowed down to two options. In the CapCon bill that funded the study, there was language to specify that we'd look at an expansion, and we did. And then we also looked at the possibility of a new construction within the Capitol complex. In the pre-meeting handout that I provided, you can see some of the project background. The museum collection actually predates the state of Wyoming. The territorial legislature was the first to authorize collecting on behalf of the people of Wyoming. We've moved quite a few times in the museum's history, including for a time, this room right here was the State Museum back in the early 20th century. We moved into our current location in the Barrett Building in 1951. So we're closing in on our 75th year in that location. As we were working on this study, we kind of looked back at what the state of the museum was when we moved into our current facilities, and specifically the collection. So you'll see on that handout, when we moved into the Barrett Building, we had 5,428 artifacts in the museum's collection. And in those ensuing 7 decades, the collection now contains over 72,000 artifacts. So there's a whole lot of history that is held by the museum for the people of Wyoming that was really never, that Barrett Building was never intended to be able to showcase that amount of history, that amount of a collection. So that's a really important thing I think we discovered as part of this study. The document identifies a number of deficiencies that could be addressed by taking the recommended actions, as well as some opportunities that are out there for us to take advantage of. Some of the deficiencies is just the visual identity of the Barrett Building as a museum. I mean, it's an office building. It looks like an office building. I think we hear from visitors that they don't necessarily know just walking down the street that there's going to be a museum in this facility. Probably more pressing for us, at least, is the inadequate facilities to preserve artifacts. So preserving our history for the future generations requires well-controlled environments, and the Barrett Building as an office building just doesn't have the envelope to maintain those types of conditions. So just to take an example from our last month, our relative humidity in our most sensitive storage area, where we keep them kind of the most valuable, most precious artifacts that we hold, in the space of less than 12 hours, we saw it drop from 65% down to 32%. It's, a huge drop in the relative humidity. We also just see it go kind of up and down and up and down really consistently. And, we work closely with A&I, and they've done a great job trying to maintain that as best they can. But what they tell us is kind of the same thing the study said, is when the envelope isn't meant to contain that kind of level, there's just not a lot you can do with equipment. The sensitive storage is just about the furthest thing. It's on the 3rd floor of the Barrett Building, about the furthest thing from the central utility plant in the whole Capitol complex. So it's a far run to try to get that humidity control in there. So in addition to that climate stuff, there is just the gallery spaces. They don't feel like a museum gallery. Our ceilings are extremely low. 9 feet 10 inches is the average usable height. There are sections that are around 7 feet. So people don't go in there. We hear a lot, and you'll see in the handout from public comment, we hear that it's cramped. We hear that it's small. Kind of recommendations from the consultants who carried out the study is 20-foot clear height gallery ceilings. So we're nowhere near that recommendation. And along those same lines, because it was designed as an office building, we have this 20-foot grid of columns. We have this really kind of circuitous, confusing flow. And we actually hear a lot from our visitors. It's not intuitive. People don't understand how to move through. They're not getting that clear story of Wyoming's history that we think we should be telling. So those are just a few of the deficiencies. Looking at some of the opportunities that were identified to we could address as part of this. The big one for me is meeting the public's expectations for the display of collections. And so you can see there below at the bottom of the page in big numbers, only 1.5% of the collection is currently on exhibit. That's a really low number, even by museum standards, where these numbers often are pretty low for museums that have as large a collection, or more massive collections than we do. The public survey, we asked people to rank the most important priorities for a new museum or a reimagined facility. The results were exhibits. So people want to see more exhibits. They want to see a broader array of exhibits. So art, natural history, human history. And they want to just see a broader representation of what Wyoming's culture is, what Wyoming's history is. In addition to that, we think there's an opportunity to expand the impact and reach of the Wyoming State Museum, both in impacting citizens of Wyoming, but also contributing to the economy of Wyoming. So the market research conducted during this project shows that there's a potential to double museum visitation. We also looked at the potential of revenue generation as part of this, which would allow us to push resources out to other museums around the state, which we do at a really small level now, but the kind of revenue generation that's possible through this project would allow us to really amp up that ability to support museums and cultural institutions around the state. In terms of economic impact, we know that museums, based on a 2017 study, contribute about $200 million annually to Wyoming's GDP. Cultural tourists spend average of 60% more than your average leisure traveler. And they represent a big part of that. 76% of leisure travelers engage with cultural sites or activities. And because of our location here in Cheyenne, right at the corner of the interstates, we have a real opportunity to capture people as they enter the state, traveling to wherever they're going, and to redirect them to these important cultural sites that the state holds. So that's another opportunity there to elevate our role as a gateway to the Wyoming's cultural destinations. As part of the study, we did do a public survey that was open in March and April of this year. So moving on to that next page. 292 survey respondents. We also had a couple public meetings and some person on the street interviews as part of the public engagement. You can see just a couple of the key findings, I think, from that public input. So when we asked people in comparison to other museums that they have visited to describe the Wyoming State Museum, I think you see some really great stuff like, oh, it's great, it's free, we love it, but we also see, oh, it's cramped, it's small, and it's dated. So we're definitely seeing both sides of the coin there. And then again, going back to the exhibits, I mean, people just really would like to see more exhibits. They'd like to see changing exhibits. They'd like to see things changed out or refreshed more often. So you can see on that second question, exhibits are the top 4 responses, and then also the 7th response after increased invisibility and a desire for more outdoor areas. On the project, there was a consultant that specializes in museum operations and market research. And so they did this market analysis that you'll see on the 3rd page, benchmarking. Again, potential, they think, to double the visitation for the museum. They identified a potential audience of 3.2 million, which includes everybody living within a 75-mile radius and every overnight visitor that visits Cheyenne in a year. Cultural institutions generally don't capture a huge percent of that total potential audience. Right now in Cheyenne, nobody is capturing more than 1.9% of that. The State Museum, as it currently exists, captures 1.4%. We believe, based on national benchmarking, looking at similar institutions in similar markets, that we could get that capture rate up to 2.5 or 3%. As part of the museum operations, this group also looked at revenue generation as 4 different potential avenues for generating revenue. And again, one of the goals here is to take some of that revenue to be able to continue to acquire artifacts that represent Wyoming's history. Things right now we rely primarily on donations. We do have a small acquisition fund that's from the revenue we generate through the museum gift shop. But this would allow us to purchase artifacts that are important to Wyoming's history that are currently not kind of in reach of what the museum can do. But also at least 25 to 30% of that would be reinvested into state programs. So we do currently do traveling exhibits that are offered for free to any museum or cultural institution in Wyoming. We have our traveling trunks programs that go out to schools across the state, and then the students and classrooms will call in and do a virtual program with our educator if they can't get down here to visit the museum in person. And we also do a lot of professional consultation and work with museums that are trying to, say, achieve AAM accreditation or just get a better handle on their collections or their exhibits policies. So the 4 channels they identify for revenue are admissions. So the museum in all its history has been free, and we think it's really important to remain free for citizens of Wyoming. So we looked at what it would take, just what we could generate if we just charged out-of-state visitors, which is a fairly common model in museums and cultural institutions. 58% of state museums, I should say, currently do charge admission. And based on the analysis, if we were to achieve that 2.5% capture rate, and only charge out-of-state visitors, assuming that the percentage of out-of-state visitors stays about where it is, we're looking at about $400,000 annually in revenue from just admissions. There's also a possibility to add a membership program with benefits for more local residents, special perks if we have traveling exhibits, maybe free entry to those, discounts at the gift store, and partnerships with other museums. Pretty small, but it could generate 15 to 20 thousand a year in revenue. And then events. So this is a big thing for basically all museums these days. The State Museum currently does not host events, but if we were to have an updated facility, whether an expansion or a new building, we could look at the possibility of hosting private events. We've met with several other museums. I was actually just on a call with the Idaho State Museum yesterday. This was a big part of their business plan when they did their renovation and expansion back in 2017, 2018. So they've been doing events. They obviously had a bit of a dip over the last few years, but she says they are exceeding the expectations that they had for that, even when they did the business plan. And right now the conversation that they're having is how much demand can we actually handle with the staff that they have. So there's more demand for events at their museum than they really can accommodate at this point. When we met with History Colorado, obviously serving a much bigger market, but private events and rentals are the single biggest contributor to their earned revenue. So it's a big part of how museums are achieving their programs these days. The analysis provided through the level 1, level 2 study suggests for a new state museum that's looking at maybe 100,000 annually in potential revenue through those. Finally, the only self-generated revenue that we currently activate on is concessions. So our museum gift shop is run by a concessionaire. This study contemplates, especially in the option B location, not only a gift store, but also potential for a small cafe run by a concessionaire where we'd be on the old St. Mary's lot. And so through those two concession opportunities, probably 45 to 50,000 annually in total revenue. So looking all over, if we were to activate on all 4 of those revenue streams, we're looking at, between 500,000 and 600,000 probably annually in self-generated revenue. And to kind of put that in context for what that means for the State Museum, our 200 series budget currently is about, I think, 38,000 a year. So it's a huge potential opportunity to take those funds and invest them back into the cultural resources of the state. The last benchmarking piece here was just looking at some other similar museum projects that have happened across the state. So you can see that in the table on the handout. Both state projects and private funded museum projects. Many of these were worked on by the consultants that we have been working with. So they had the access to some of that information, how they broke down construction costs and the cost per square foot. The average cost per square foot adjusted to Q3 of 2025 is $709 per square foot for those comparable projects. This next section here really was where the bulk of the energy was spent on that level 1, level 2 study. And that was really an effort to right size the museum's needs. So you can see based on the collection, we could support a really, really big museum, but it was important to think about what would be appropriate for the kind of space that we have to be able to expand without requiring a significant addition of staff to maintain that new space. And so this is where we've landed with about 108,000 square feet in a facility, whether that can be achieved as an expansion or as new construction. That is more than double our current gross square footage in the Barrett building, which is 45,000. Early on in the process, we looked at the potential to relocate all the collections to one site. So as some of you may know, currently most of the museum's collections are stored off-site here in Cheyenne at our warehouse. It would be beneficial to store everything on one site, but it quickly becomes cost prohibitive to try to pack it all into one building, especially on a small lot in the Capitol complex. So all of these projections, as you see on that table, contemplate keeping the Unicover storage facility. Although when you see the budget in the full report, there is a little bit of investment to potentially improve the storage conditions and the climate conditions there. So I think that gets to what I think are maybe the more exciting pages, which is looking at what these two options really could be. So option A, as you see there, which they've named Barrett South, is an expansion onto the existing Barrett building. And the priority here was to really be thoughtful about that extension. So it does not look like, this big modern architecture eating the old building, which you sometimes unfortunately see in museum expansions. We really wanted to make it feel like a natural and respectful extension of that Barrett building, which is itself fairly historic. So expanding onto that south lawn with a large central well-lit lobby. You can see in the smaller picture a ground level patio as well as a second level patio that would connect to an event space that could become a gallery if we were to decide not to activate on event rentals as a revenue stream. What this allows us to do is put all of the new collection space and all of the new exhibit space in that new construction so we can get those 20-foot ceiling heights, so we can get a building envelope that can maintain the temperature and humidity requirements to preserve the artifacts. And in our existing space in the Barrett building, we keep some of the less sensitive museum operations. So offices, our museum classrooms, which are really heavily utilized, and other meeting spaces of that nature. Option B, they identified the St. Mary's lot, or here is called Capitol East, as a potential site for new construction of a museum. The concept here is kind of a front porch to have this fully glazed in front of the museum that would be a welcoming space for visitors, especially part of the market analysis showed that not surprisingly, there is a lack of things to do here in the winter. And people like to feel like they're outside when they're not having to deal with the elements. And so that's one of the goals that they tried to accomplish with this concept. To create a space where you're kind of bringing that outside in for the long winters, and especially for our local residents. A really broad welcoming lobby space that can also host events. And then towards the back of the building where it's more protected from light is, again, you have all the galleries and the collection storage there. Another key aspect for this concept was to really take advantage of that connection to the Capitol building. So obviously being right across the street, you've got this big front glazed windows with landings as you go up the different levels so people can stop and kind of look back at that building. We know we share a lot of audience with the Capitol, both the student field trips that frequent here, as well as especially the summer season, the tourists who are going both to the museum and to the Capitol. We asked the consultants to kind of give us a metric to compare these two options, which you'll see there on the last page. The good news is that both of these options would allow us to meet the needs that have been identified in this study to fix the climate and temperature issues, to have that feeling of a museum, that visible identity as a museum, and fit all the space that has been determined through the spatial programming. But when you look at some of the other things, there's clear advantages to that option B, and that was what was recommended by the consultants at the end of the study. Actually adds green space, replacing a parking lot with a building and grounds. It has that connection, as we mentioned, to the Capitol. You gain a lot in terms of visitor flow and layout by working, not having to try to make that connection to the old building, but being able to design from the ground up. And another option is adding parking underground there, which would be a little bit more difficult to do on that Barrett South site, as the geotechnical report did find groundwater pretty high in that location, but they did not find on the St. Mary's lot. So that is kind of the really high level summary of that, and happy to answer any questions. As I said, the report was delivered at the end of last month, and happy to share that with anybody who would be interested. About 200 pages. So with that, I'd stand for questions.
Director, thank you.
Madam Chairman.
Senator Anderson?
Madam Chairman, is the location of the State Museum set by Constitution
Yes.
or by statute?
I can answer that. It's set by us.
By statute.
It's not set by anywhere right now.
It doesn't say.
Oh, okay.
Senator Anderson
Okay,
would like
would-
the State Museum to be in Casper.
Would you have the possibility of a satellite museum, say in the center part of the state? We're studying right now, set aside $50,000 to study how many employees would like to move to Riverton. And we set aside $2 million
For just an office building.
building a building there that maybe could be part of office building and a museum. Is that a possibility to have a satellite?
Don't respond.
Yes.
Madam Chair, Senator, a specific satellite museum, I mean, that's certainly not something that we've contemplated as part of this study. What I would say is that aspects of the collection, artifacts from the collection, do go out to other museums around the state. both the traveling exhibits, which typically don't include artifacts, but for museum types of facilities, and many of the historic sites, we frequently loan out those artifacts for display, for interpretation all over the state. So I think there's the potential to incorporate that, whether it could be a full satellite museum, I think is probably outside of the scope of what we've looked at this study.
So just to follow up with that, Kevin. So part of this report talks about interactions with and actually providing expansions for all of the county museums around the state. So we want to talk a little bit about that.
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Nicholas, I think that again, this goes back to that. Let me see, I should look at the actual page that this references. This goes back to that revenue generation piece, I believe is what you're referencing to say, if we have this revenue that we're bringing in, we can really develop a robust traveling exhibits program, something that is going to have artifacts. Right now they typically are pictures and posters and things, but something that would have artifacts that would be a resource for those county museums, for other city museums.
And part of the design, as I understand it, will have some regionalization to it. So it will direct anyone who comes here to where other museums are, like the museum in Thermopolis, for example, with the dinosaurs in it, and all over the state on where to go to kind of funnel out business to, or museum quality experiences across the state of Wyoming. And
Madam Chair and Mr. Co-Chair, that's exactly one of the main things that we focused on with the consultants, is to make sure that we have more of a statewide reach. We understand that we're in one corner of the state. And so how do we get revenue to send out artifacts, which means they have to be in a climate controlled, safe situation when we send them out the door, so they come back safely to the State Museum. And then, yes, I think we would absolutely find space to kind of promote the other cultural resources that are in the state, the other museums and galleries and historic sites that are across the state.
Representative Larson.
And I apologize if you hit on this and I just wasn't paying attention, but so on your operational costs, do you anticipate that you'd use the revenue generation to offset operational costs, or are you just thinking you would take the revenue generation for acquisition purposes?
Madam Chair, Representative Larson, so it's a little bit of both. Some of that additional revenue would go towards what we think of as new, like 200, 900 series types of costs. So there would be no increase towards the general fund in those avenues. In order to activate on some of that, on admissions, on events, there would need to be some staff. And the business plan does assign those staff to the general fund. So some of that revenue generation would be basically all of the 200 series, all of those new operating costs outside of staffing would be covered by the self-generated revenue. The staffing would be a request to the general.
So, Madam Chairman, what percentage of the revenue generated would you anticipate would go to help offset general funds for operation and maintenance?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Larson. So let's see if I can find that, and it will be in the full study, which again, I'm happy to share. So.
And we may not be able to find it today, but we'll certainly get that answer to you. Yeah.
Representative Stith.
Madam Chairman, so to get the projected cost of this, do we take the recommended square footage and then multiply it by the $709 per square foot that you estimated to get what, $72 million? 81.
Madam Chair, Representative Stith. Yeah, so the costs projected here for construction costs alone, and this is escalated to Q3 of 2025 for the renovation would be about 74 million. For a new building, about 83 million. There's additional, the total project costs as well as all the exhibits that would have to go into this exhibit or into this. Takes it to about 122 in the renovation and 132 in the new building. And neither of those contemplate about 2 million for upgrades to the unit cover building or, additional parking, which they listed about 5 million if we were to do underground parking.
So, Madam Chair.
Co-chairman.
So, committee, I asked, LSO to put this on the agenda. We just got this report about 2 weeks ago. And I serve on the, Capitol Square Committee, which consists of, the governor and the state auditor and some other, agencies in the Capitol Square projects. And so this was presented to us just last week. So this is all brand new stuff. It just kind of hit the press. It will go in front of the SBC, I think in later in July, around the 21st, I think. And so it's just kind of hitting the ground. But what did happen in the meeting last week is the Capitol Square group suggested that we consider a third site, which is the old, what we call a Safeway lot, which is on the other side of the parking structure, because of the size of that lot. There are pros and cons for that particular location that it's not worth getting into now, but there's more room over there. But there is a real value to have a proximity to the Capitol. And just also, it's always been the plan that that parking lot will go away one of these days because you don't use premium parking area, the premium property in the city of Cheyenne in the state of Wyoming, the building in the state of Wyoming, you don't have a parking lot right next to it. And so we just blacktopped that. And at one point in time, there was a building that was going to be before Hersler got expanded and redone. We were going to put an office building over there. It was going to be over at Barrett Building that, or the Safeway parking lot, which was canceled vetoed by then Governor Meade. But so they suggested to look at that. This group suggested to look at that third site. They also suggested, and I think had a very strong majority of the folks there, that instead of what you see as the Capitol East, which is basically a square building put on that city block, is that they would turn it, make it a rectangular building, close 24th Street and close off the street that's right in front of us, turn that into a mall, and then it would have kind of a roundabout there by the Hathaway, and just open all that up to green space, both for security and all different reasons. And that would involve finding new parking areas, but that's always been in a long-term capital development plan. And so it's kind of a long-term plan as we visualize all this and how it happens. Someday Hathaway will go away. Someday that parking structure over here will probably go away because that's also prime parking lot. But we're talking 50, 100 years from now. And so we're trying to develop this master plan on how this whole Capitol Square area will develop over time and how we protect it and expand it for generations to come. And so this is just kind of the first step in that process. And so I thought just to get people's minds thinking about it and your brains flowing on ideas and thoughts and ideas about it to present it to appropriations first. So, and by the way, this is the report. We can make it all available to everybody. So it's fun reading.
Co-chairman, thank you. I'm curious to know how the committee feels about an underground parking right adjacent across the street here, knowing we can't park under the Capitol during the interim, and instead we get parking tickets. No, I'm not burned.
I think the projection
Every
was,
day.
Mr. Kocher, that a full underground parking would be an extra 10 million. roughly.
Five.
Um,
That was my idea.
By the way, the other thing would, in fact, I asked LSO to start looking into a bill draft for this. In order to maximize this project, I think we need, at least in part, a public-private partnership. So we can get, because it's a lot of money. But I think that there's a capability of getting large donations, millions and millions of dollars of donations from various industries, if we can provide a statutory construct so that it can be tax deductible. And we've done that before, but to do it, it requires a constitution or a statutory specific statute where we allow it, basically. And so that actually is now being constructed so that you take the building costs of $80 million if we put in a parking garage. And just imagine if we could raise 25 million. I also had this conversation this morning with Diane. We do have a reserve account for the tourism tax dollars where we could get some additional dollars for that. So once again, we're trying to just open all opportunities to maximize how and where we can do this and make the project real. And it may be like the capital project. We might have to save for 5 years before we can actually launch this thing. But I'm excited about the project, and so I wanted to share it with everybody. And we need everyone's input on to make this thing come to reality. So, thanks.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How would you, I'm intrigued, and I'm glad that we're looking down the road for these. The underground parking, is that would that be a long range view of when that would occur, or how is that in the scale of what we're looking time-wise?
Mr. Co-Chairman, I randomly mentioned that would be a requirement in the event we really developed the State Museum to be a destination location, recognizing parking is a challenge down here, and thought, also during session and right now, the underground parking below this Capitol is not large enough. And it needs to be expanded, right? I mean, just for the regular current operations of the Capitol, right? I'm not kidding when every time there's an interim meeting, I'm getting a parking ticket, right? The parking garage across the street oftentimes is full. It was after lunch today. So, that's a practical, I think, pragmatic infrastructure concern. And I thought if the St. Mary's lot was going to be utilized and we're going to dig, let's dig deep and think thoughtfully about true concerns about what makes the museum accessible in the winter. And then also perhaps a connector between the Capitol and the museum underground that way. And so it seems like maybe a luxury item or out of the box, but it also doesn't seem logical or the right result not to do that, recognizing we are in a downtown location where parking is always a challenge. And so if we're going to dig, put in an underground parking garage. I like the one right now. I mean, I just think that makes sense. And so it is a lot, 5 to 10 million probably, but I think that's a good use of money. And it was my idea. If anybody would like to donate to my parking ticket fund, that would be fine.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Looking at your study versus your budget, currently your budget shows an annual revenue for your concessionaire of about 100,000 a year in the lease for your gift store. To the study saying you're thinking you might be able to create upwards of 600,000 in revenue, I think is slightly overly optimistic, knowing that restaurants and cafes are the #1 most failing business in the United States. And you're currently only making 100,000 a year to multiply that in the realm you're talking, I think is maybe overly ambitious, but anyhow, I digress. I'm excited about the project. My next concern though is the cost of the project. The number I've seen is double what the $709 a square foot of any museum that's been done in the United States or that you've listed here in the last 5 or 6 years. And we're going to double that for the Wyoming State Museum, going close to 150 some million versus what should be about 76 million if you use the square footage times the 709. And I realize that involves doing some other stuff, but I'm guessing these folks also had other stuff they had going on. So the overall cost is very concerning to me. And so I'd like to figure out how we could bring this into a realistic cost so that we can make it happen, because I am excited about the project taking place. And, and you look at some of the completion dates of these, you have Helena, Montana at 133,000 gross square feet. So roughly 20-some thousand square feet larger than you're proposing here at 62 million. And we're talking 150-some million. So again, I just think your numbers are not, your consultant did not provide you with good data is what I guess I would say here ultimately. And so hopefully you can go back to your consultant and say, give us some good data so that we can actually propose a great idea to the legislature. And then I think we're going to get after it. Because like I said, I'm very excited about doing it. And I would conclude by saying my vote is to expand on the Barrett building because I don't want to see a large structure placed next to the Capitol. Having a little distance would be good, but having it within a walking distance is outstanding. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, Representative Walter, just a little bit of a clarification on the revenue piece. Most of that new revenue is coming through admissions and events, which we don't currently generate revenue in that way. And so actually they project our kind of concessionaire store revenue to be in line with what it currently is, maybe to see a slight boost with the increased visitation. But of that 600,000, 500 to 600,000, almost all of that is coming through admissions. 80% is through admission. So the second piece, I think, just on those different cost numbers to dive into that a little bit. The construction costs are what are listed out here under the table provided, which would equate to the 73 to 83 million and not to the 150. A lot of the time, the full project costs for these projects aren't publicized. And so we were trying to get, or the consultants in this case were trying to get the most comparable numbers they could. And I do recognize the cost is still high on the higher end of what they've provided here. But that is just a little bit of additional information about how they derive those costs that are provided.
Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to remind the committee that tomorrow is WIO Gives. So you can make a donation to your favorite museum or cultural attraction, but also that the Wyoming State Historical Society has a foundation where you can make a tax deductible gift today, and that maybe we could work with them to create a fund that benefits this project. So that's my plug, but also my request, because I am a visual learner. I'd love to see how many visitors we see in the museum now, and then that number projected out, but also the revenue flow of for admissions, membership, facility rental concessions, knowing that today some of those are zero, but to do a comparison would be helpful to me. Thank you.
So I'm just gonna, that's a request, not a question per se. So I think Representative Sherwood's comment relates to, I think, Co-Chairman Nicholas's, request to LSO for a bill draft. And just for clarity on that, was that to create a statutory mechanism for the State Museum to accept donations from private entities that would be tax deductible?
Yes.
Co-Chairman says yes. And so I don't know if LSO has had a chance to evaluate that, or Representative Sherwood's idea. Any thoughts from LSO about those two concepts? And I know that's on the spot.
Sure, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, Tamara Revley, Legislative Counsel with LSO and staff to this committee. I have received the individual bill draft requests, and I think it's been made public at this point by Chairman Nicholas. And so I've done some preliminary research into the tax consequences of making a deduction on an individual or corporate's taxes. And I believe that can be set up in statute. It appears to be under the IRS publications fairly simple that any donation to a charitable organization, which is defined to include any state or local government, political subdivision, et cetera, as long as it's used solely for public purposes, that it can be tax deductible. So I think that would be fairly easy to set up, but I do want to do some more research and find out whether we've had issues in the past with that.
Sure, the issue has to do with the Constitution as well, of a public entity taking money from a private organization. There's a constitutional prohibition against that. So that, I think, probably is the greater concern rather than the IRS requiring any tax deductible contributions to go for a charitable purpose. So we may want to look into that more, or utilize other mechanisms that are currently in play to explore that idea. I think the committee certainly supports the idea of providing private funds for this project. Senator Guru is nodding approvingly.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. While we weren't given or wasn't available at the time, the full report, your small but feisty TRW committee did receive a nice report on this plan, and it was very enthusiastically received. As I recall, I think most of the comments that were given at that time kind of tended to lean towards a new facility more than refurbishing current facility. But like I say, I think it was very well received by the group. And so, like I say, we didn't have all the numbers and all that. It was more conceptual, but we did have a pretty good discussion about it.
Any additional questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for informing us of this exciting work underway. We look forward to hearing from you again. And with that, Joint Appropriations Committee, we will take our 3 o'clock break for the next 15 minutes. So we will come back at about 3:20. There's no public comment. It's a good thing the House is present. Senate is missing. We do not have a Senate quorum, but I think our rules. Senator Guru? There he is. Can we proceed? Thank you. Thank you. All right, welcome back, Joint Appropriations Committee. We are back from our break. The time is 3:28. We're going to now hear updates on state ARPA expenditures and the IIJA awards. Director Hibbard.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm going to be as quick as I can. I have a couple of points to make, but before I do that, for the record, I'm Kevin Hibbard. I'm the Director of the Wyoming State Budget Department. With me, I have Christine Eminger, and she is everything ARPA, and she's the Senior Budget Analyst for the department. So we're really pleased to have her on board doing ARPA for us. So with that, I have two related items, and I'm going to be really quick about it. First of all, yesterday we went live with the upgrade to the dashboard. You can go on there now and you can see obligations, expenditures, and budgets, meaning that before we were just showing you the expenditures, but now you can go on and you can see where the agencies have obligated the funds. It's mission critical because the next topic that I'm going to discuss is the importance of knowing how much money that we're going to have available in ARPA for redeployment. That needs to take place in this budget session because it has to be obligated by December 31st of 2024. That's the last opportunity that we're going to have for the legislature, unless there's a flexibility provided by the UST. We'll continue to watch that. Sure, while I'm talking, Christine can bring up the ARPA portal. So with this understanding of where we are going to be positioned, and if you'd like to go out there anytime that you want to, this is sbd.wy.gov. Thank you. sbd.wy.gov is the State Budget Department website, and you can navigate. But what I wanted to say is that with this new upgrade that we have on the dashboard, what we can see is that unobligated amount. What we're going to be is we're going to be processing, with the help of Director McKay, the policy office, and the governor, is a process for us to identify what we believe is going to be available for redeployment in ARPA dollars. And that redeployment will happen through a governor's letter with the governor's recommendations, with a statistic that's associated with what we believe is going to be unobligated or turned back. One of the provisions in Senate File 66 and 195 now is that any unobligated dollars would go back to HA's capital construction or water and sewer. The problem with that, you heard from state construction, you heard from the University of Wyoming, and you're hearing from us, and you'll hear from OSLI that we can't find contractors. So not only do we want to identify how much money that we have available for redeployment, we would like your assistance in developing the flexibility come next fall for us to be nimble enough to see that we have all these obligations made by December 31st of 2024. So basically what I'm saying here in a real quick fashion, trying to be as expeditious as possible. We upgraded the portal so that we can see budget expenditures, obligations now, so that it's transparent for everybody. I've expressed our need to work with you, collaborate with you between now and the time that the governor would submit a governor's letter to this committee to redeploy what we believe would be unobligated, and then provide us the nimble nature that we can to react at the proper time. Let's say, for example, on November 30th, that the UST gives us more flexibility with future funding. Sure, we're going to try to complete our mission, but if they don't, we want to be nimble and to be able to get those funds obligated. So basically, that's just what I wanted to share with you, but I want to make a big priority out of the importance of that.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Director Hibbard right now? All right, seeing none, we'll go to you. Welcome.
Hey, Hey, good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the Joint Appropriation Committee. My name is Christine Eminger. I am the Senior Budget Analyst and the ARPA Project Lead for the State Budget Department. Just to touch on what Director Hibbard has already presented to you, there were two updates that were made to the dashboard. One of them he has talked through. It is total encumbrances that we have added. You can see here that this green line has been added. It denotes the encumbrance line. For all intents and purposes, we're using an example from the Office of State Lands and Investments, an awarded SLIB portal application for Riverton Medical District. And you can see here that we have an appropriated amount of $10 million. We can see that the Riverton Medical District has submitted reimbursement to OSLI. We can see that expenditure amount, and then we can see the remaining encumbrance that they need to draw down on. The encumbrance feature provides two different areas of oversight. It provides oversight and increases transparency into our grant management process for both the state stakeholders and also the public as well. The other item that it provides is just an evaluation, an easy evaluation and identification of who may need assistance, whether that becomes entailed in the encumbrances or if that is the expenditures, if they're having trouble getting reimbursements to OSLI, things of that nature. The other update that we made to the dashboard was located on the status of funds page. We have been asked several times about total appropriation or total apportionment from the United States Treasury or congressional. Here, you can actually, there's a multi-select that has been enabled for the dashboard. So you can easily drill in to select all funds. You can see that the total apportionment is around $6.9 billion with expectation that that will increase as more federal funds are transferred into our state or given to our state. For the example purposes, you can actually drill into both IIJA and IRA, which were the two most recent federal appropriations. And you can see here that we have a total apportionment of $3.19 billion. And then if we just want to singly go in and check out what we got for IIJA, that should be updated real quick. IRA for $500-some thousand. This item came in around last week, so this is our first funding stream from IRA. With that, I will just open it up for any questions, any value that anyone wants to add to the dashboard.
Christine, thank you. Questions for Christine? Great work on this dashboard. I think this is a very valuable tool for both us and the public. So thanks for continuing to work on it and making it available. Senator Guru?
For those of us that are, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. For those of us that are technologically challenged, could you send us a link to this?
Yes, absolutely, Madam Chairman and Senator Guru.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Madam Chairman, the other are
Give them a tutorial on how to use the internet.
Yes, that would work too.
Thank you. Director Hibbard?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Also, there have been folks in this room that have traveled up to the state library about 3 blocks north of us. We have a little conference room in there. If you'd like to come in, we would be more than happy to give you a one-on-one exercise or training for this at any time at your convenience. Just get a hold of one of us. We'd be happy to do that for you.
Thank you. Further questions on this topic?
And just to, Madam Co-Chair, Kevin, just give us an update on it and anticipated reversions, because my understanding is it's right. The most recent calculation was roughly about 20 million that may be available for appropriation by the time we get to session. Number two, my question is, currently, what is the statutory guidelines in terms of where that money goes if we don't do anything?
Madam Chair. Right now, there's a guaranteed floor of how much we would have back of 5 million because the Innovative Health Fund was backstopped by general funds. They can't spend 10 million, they can only spend 5. They can do a combination of ARPA or general funds. So we know the basement of this conversation is $5 million that we can redeploy. Then if you think in terms of the statistics that we had representing today, it could be somewhere between 35, approach $40 million of what we might be discussing when we've identified all the possible amounts of funding that are available for redeployment. Now, the The process was this. In Senate File 66 and 195, it says, redirect unobligated, unspent opera direct appropriation dollars equally between HHS capital construction, appropriation, water, and sewer. We believe that that's going to be overly complicated us for accomplish because of the construction industry right now. Those, if you actually were able to get them obligated, find contractors by the time that we had December 31st, 2024, we may not actually get it spent by the deadline of expenditure, which is December 31st of 2026. So we believe that we need to find some nimbleness in there with the understanding that we want to complete our mission if we can, but we want to be able to say, here's what we believe is going to be available for redeployment, have that in a governor's letter with recommendations, and then have the legislature facilitate the appropriation, but making absolutely certain that we recognize the need of us being able to be nimble, particularly in, say, between October of 2024 and December of 31st of 2024. We really want to stress that. Now, I'm just going to give you an example. In CARES, the 11th hour, 11:59 hour with CARES, we moved money over to corrections, $8 million. Otherwise, we would have lost the ability, but we had a plan. It was in place. It was understood. We had the 10-day waiting period already met for the B11. So the Joint Appropriations Committee was communicated with our intent, and we landed that. If we hadn't, we would have given up more than 8 million. That was just, the 8 million was the portion to corrections. So that's the nimbleness that we're thinking about putting in place. But we still want to make sure that if the intent is to attempt to complete the mission and the United States Treasury comes out and changes the dynamic of what the flexibility is. And there was a weird event that took place last Friday. They tipped their cards. I'm playing poker. They show me their cards and then they take them back. So right now, if you think about this, there might be a possibility if they follow through with what they tipped in the reporting. They said, okay, we set up these reporting categories: transportation, education, and emergency response. That might be the flexibility that we might be exploring with you come October, November, December of this year. But there's no guarantees because we have not received the Treasury guidance. When we do, we will make sure that we apply that flexibility in that nature with the recommendations that we have with the redeployment or some other feature that's provided us with flexibility that Rennie talked about, excuse me, Director McKay talked about with you about a year and a half ago. So that's where we're positioning that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Guru.
Thank you. And Mr. Hibbard or whoever in our distinguished panel, I want to try to take a shot at this one. I'm looking up at this and I see 6.9 billion allocated, total remaining 3.2, a little more than half unallocated at this point. I know y'all talked to other folks in other states. How do we stack up in comparison to some of to other states as far as that about normal about right now for the rest of the rest of the country as far as how much has been allocated, how much has been spent? I know, we're waiting for guidance. We have consultants that are helping us make sure that we stay within our lanes and all that. How are we doing with regard to allocation versus what's in?
Director Hibbard.
Madam Chairwoman, I really respect that question. I love to have the opportunity to answer that because we believe that we are flat out in front of everybody on this. Not only with the obligations and the expenditures, but also the portal with the requalifications of what we have to do because CARES is not ARPA. We have all these special requirements that we could go into great detail with. But in our conversations with GAO, that after they had a telephone conversation with Christine and myself, they asked us to show us all these things that we were doing. For example, establishing the relationship of a subrecipient. Did you know you have a subrecipient relationship? Subrecipient risk monitoring sessions that we have with the local governments. We're not just facilitating the state of Wyoming. All the local governments are meeting with us to have us facilitate their needs. I can go on for quite a while, but I will tell you this. that there are horror stories out there, but they're not about Wyoming.
I haven't seen Kevin this excited since he broke his leg.
Or shot the elk.
Please.
Madam Chairman, may I follow up?
Yeah, Christine, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Senator Grew, with respect to the 3.2 billion total remaining, that is just a remaining amount that the state is yet to receive in. So once we get a B11 or a NAFR, that is where we will log that, and then you will see it updated on our dashboard.
Thank you.
Well, this is good news. We don't quite know what to do with that. We only like problems.
Madam
Mr.
Chairwoman.
Yeah, Director.
With all that excitement and the fact that I am 62 years old and I acted like a 20-year-old when I was elk hunting and broke my foot, the reality of this situation is we've got really great partners here in the state of Wyoming. We've got the state auditor's office. We've got Clifton Larson Allen. We've got OSLI. We've got the Department of Health. All these wonderful subject matter experts that are all working together with us, the governor's office, the policy office, the legislature, everybody. We're listening all the time, but we can't say that we didn't accomplish this without all these wonderful relationships that we enjoy, including our partners with LSO.
Thank you. Mr. McKay, any comments?
Madam Chairwoman, Rennie McKay, Governor Gordon's Policy Director, thank you very much. I've got some slides for you, and I think it's all in your packet too, to kind of, that builds off of and probably just as another resource for all of you, either to generate questions here today or just as another means for you to stay on top of where we are with all of these federal dollars. So if you don't mind, I can kind of walk you through this a little bit and point you to a few other resources and keep going from there. I did want to just point out Russ Noel from the A&I is with me, and he is been working very hard with a whole team of folks from the agencies to manage the IIJA grants. Really, because the budget department has been and continues to be an amazing partner on all of this. We're also trying to compete for grants in the IIJA space. There's a lot more happening on that front than there was with ARPA. So it's kind of a different paradigm. And so working with the agencies to apply and secure grants and then track those with the budget department and SAO. It's a big lift, but Russ is here if anybody has any questions as we go further into the weeds. And I also just want to say thanks to Jerry Henderson. He is an intern in the governor's office this summer, a UW student who's just doing an incredible job helping us with a bunch of issues. I think his senator is in the room as well. So just wanted to start with ARPA and section 604. If you recall, there's kind of a couple notable sections for the state of Wyoming within ARPA. Section 604, talk about that on slide 2 here. Wyoming was allocated just over $109 million. And then as you look, their treasury put the requirements on how these dollars could be spent. And we were also allocated just over $5 million for administration of these $109 million. But those were the U.S. Treasury guidance on this. And then on slide 4, or I guess you go to 3 here, Karen, thank you. So sorry, here again is a little bit more detail on that.
Yes.
I would just wonder how much of that $5 million we're giving to our intern.
Madam Chairwoman, he's doing very well, but it's just, that just pays his property tax in Teton County. So I think that's. Just we'll let you know, the great news as we move forward here is that Wyoming submitted its proposal to U.S. Treasury, and we worked with all of you ahead of the session on slide 4 about how we were going to use the $109 million. All of our plans were submitted to Treasury back in 22. What has happened since then is they have a lot of questions for us. And so there's quite a bit of back and forth between the state. Thanks a lot to Christine and her team and the Director Hibbard's team who are really helping the agencies manage these. But as you see the breakdown on this, all of these applications are in. And we're now waiting on Treasury on all three fronts. But I think these were pretty important to all of you. And the great news is on broadband is that that grant has already been approved. So the application period for those first broadband dollars since the CARES Act will go out soon.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director McKay, any guesstimate on when we might hear back on the other funds that have been applied for in that? I think it was September of 22 you applied, and just like I said, I realize it's a guesstimate at this point, but any communications that might indicate when that would occur?
Madam Chairwoman, there's pretty constant contact with them. Ms. Eminger emails with them about once a week. So the back and forth is going fairly well right now. So I'd say I think this will be finalized relatively soon.
We did receive word back from the U.S. Treasury today, and State Libraries was able to give them a response today. They were very immediate in their response. And then we do expect to see some type of award possibly soon.
More good news.
Great. So that's the section 604. The next few slides are about section 602, and this is the part of the American Rescue Plan Act that we've worked so closely with you on over the last few years to aim for that survive, drive, and thrive approach. Here are the ways that we could use those dollars after revenue replacement. If you'll recall, it's $584 million went into revenue replacement already because we were one of the few states that could qualify for that. These were the eligible uses during the public health emergency. Since that's over, you can scratch out premium pay for essential workers. It's no longer an eligible use in the future because that was only during the public health emergency. But just then as you look at slide 6 here, outlining the legislature, really appreciate the work you all did in the allocation of the section 602 dollars in Senate File 66 in 2022, and then in House Bill 195 this year. So 27 programs total. There are a few sub-programs within those, and this got those dollars all allocated. So 626,000 is all that was unallocated in those two bills. And as Director Hibbard said, we're already starting to identify some of the things that will revert out of those programs. And as you made the allocations in House Bill 195. But as we move on to slide 7, it looks at the largest programs in those two bills. And there's an update here. You also obviously have the update from State Budget Department, and using their dashboard will really keep you updated on what's been allocated, what's been spent, and what's been encumbered. And so these things generally are moving. But as you can tell, the spend rate is not high right now because there are a lot of challenges in terms of contracting and awards on this. But it is happening, and you can track that live via the dashboard. So if anybody has any questions, these are the kind of second tier sized programs that are in there. And if you'll recall, we created a spreadsheet just to have something available for you too, where there's a little bit more of the verbiage about the status of these programs. And that's on that Drive Thrive website. So if you need that spreadsheet too, I can always send that to you. Great. So with that kind of gets us through the American Rescue Plan overview. And as we move into slide 9, we move into the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA. And one of the major keys with this for Wyoming is we had Rob Krieger working on this program for the governor's office. He's moved to the Energy Authority. But really what we've focused on as the executive branch is that as these competitive grants pop up, especially with IIJA, that we make sure that what we're applying for is right for Wyoming. And we can, if we compete for those grants, that they're aligned with where we want to go, and we can work with federal partners on those if we find that alignment. But there's a big tweak between formula funds and, or the big components of this are formula funds additions to existing programs versus competitive programs. So that's kind of a different approach from ARPA.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On the competitive grants, is there a timeline that they have to be submitted by? I mean, do they, and then the turnaround time, how long do they take to evaluate those? Do we have a feel for that?
Mr. McKay.
Madam Chair, it has been something to watch. So, Russ from A&I has been a great partner to the governor's office as we've tried to identify, working with agencies, what we should prioritize, keep an eye on when they come up because they come up sporadically. So as we've developed relationships with federal agencies, sometimes we get a good heads up on it and can be prepared, but they're coming now much more regularly, but a lot of those competitive grant opportunities have just started popping for us. And it is neat that we've started to see awards as well. So I can take you through a few of those examples, but we have secured, I think, 91 million so far in grant awards through IIJA. And so, we've been successful on a few fronts on that. And there's billions of dollars still out there that we'll be competing for as we go ahead.
Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you speak to our capacity to go after these grants in terms of grant writers? Like, are we using people within agencies? Are we contracting out? Are we seeing that that's a gap and that it's hindering our ability to leverage these funds? Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman. Thank you. That's definitely been something we've recognized. Director Hibbert, I think, was in front of you a few years ago talking about grant capacity in the state. And that was before we saw this enormous change in how many federal grants were available. So I think we're behind the curve, but thanks to you all, you get put money into the governor's office to try to help our ability to manage grants. And so we are working right now. We approached the first off with the dollars were in the governor's office at $1.2 million total. And we were trying to find someone we could hire. So we posted a position to see if we could get a grant writer to come in. So we would have that institutional knowledge in-house. And that sat there for about 6 months and we weren't able to hire someone. We just didn't get the right applicant. I think it's a good time to be a grant writer. But what we have shifted gears towards is a 900 series contract. And so we've completed the RFP, the bids are in and those are being evaluated now. And so we hope to have somebody on board here in the next few weeks, or at least start the contract work with the successful winner of the RFP. So I think you'll see our capacity take off. And it was many of you folks who thought that the goal there should be to also help non-state agencies and local communities. And that's how we've set up the RFP and are evaluating the proposals with that in mind, that this is supposed to help more than just state agencies. It should also help all of our communities so we can work together.
Further questions from the committee? Director Hibbert.
Madam Chairwoman, there's two elements of importance in this application, this RFP, and we are in evaluation. We should be selecting that here shortly. Grant writing itself, getting the grant, but also just as important is facilitating the grant management. And we are positioned to do that not only for the state of Wyoming and our agencies, but also the local governments. That is key to this process, because once you get one, maybe you fail. We don't want that. We want them to be successful. We want to get the expanse to the state of Wyoming, including our local government's expertise built up for both application and management.
Further comments from the committee? Representative Stitt.
Madam Chairman, for Mr. McKay, my recollection is in the section 300s of the budget last time, we parked a fair amount of money in the office of the governor for energy matching grants, 100 million there, another 75 million, and then another 80 for contingencies at the same, but it was a lot of money. Anything going on with that?
Madam Chairwoman. If you, on slide 12, we can kind of take you through a little bit of this. So, first of all, I think just an offer of thanks again. So that I think the grant funding that you allocated was something that was thinking pretty far ahead. So that's helping. And then, this has caught the eye of federal agencies, so they know that we mean business. I will tell you, as Co-Chairman Nicholas asked, the status of these it's going slow. So we have not used a lot of these matching dollars, really zero. We are starting to move some of the energy matching funds out as more of these opportunities open up. But I do think this sets us up well here over the coming months. It is fairly remarkable to me in terms of this securing those $91 million that we didn't need to use these matching funds, but it is going to open up other opportunities for us as we go ahead. So this is kind of the outline of those. The 25 million is related to the broadband money that is in the IIJA that we just found out we're getting $348 million for, but that those funds won't arrive in Wyoming until 2025. So, and then the other issue with that is that it isn't the 3-to-1 or 25% match that we've anticipated, since we got additional funds from that BEAD program above the 100 million we anticipated. We will need to have conversations with you all about how we do match the $348 million, if it's with state dollars, if it's with private dollars, or how we want to handle that going forward. But this is a very significant tool for us. If you can promote this, the language in the budget footnote for the $75 million was targeted at IIJ. So it's only available for grants that are through that federal act, not the other federal acts. Ms. Eminger had detailed how many other dollars are out there through the other acts. Those are not eligible for this match currently. If we want to expand eligibility, that would be something to consider next year. And the other language in that is that it's the state portion is at that 20%, 4-to-1. And then the other challenge or part of that is the language requires that it's only political subdivisions of the state. So that does allow us to work with locals. There are certainly other private entities that are interested. And then another factor there is that it's to qualify for federal grants. So we're looking at that language and how that works in terms of those folks that secured a grant and could match it with these dollars, but currently, either they didn't need it to qualify, but they could match it in another way. So that's an update on those matching funds.
Thank you, Ms. McKay. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Rennie, or maybe Director Glenn, if you could give me, if I could go back to the ARPA dollars and go to that outdoor recreation grant. If my recollection is correct, there was a lot of interest in that, and then we found out the criteria on that had some restrictions, and so that it wasn't going to be, the program wasn't going to be as broad as we had hoped, perhaps. Do we have final guidance on that, and are we starting to make some of those grant awards? Where are we at on that? And am I corrected? Did I understand that accurately?
Madam Chairwoman, thank you for it's an important question, because you may be hearing about this program or health innovation. The $5 million for the Health and Human Services Innovation Grants is another one that we were excited about the concept. It's hard to align the applications we received with the federal law. And so there's certainly been some grant applications that we're trying not to deny them on their face. We're trying to work with applicants to see if they can qualify. And sometimes it's additional research into the proposal allows us to find a way that shows that it is eligible under the federal law. So definitely the outdoor recreation grants were ones that we found some challenges qualifying. I think there were $72 million in applications when there was only 12 million, and there was another 10 million added in House Bill 195. So there's ample funding in that program. And it may be more than we can find eligible applications for. So I think we've made some improvements and some advancements, I guess I would say, in terms of analyzing what can get one of those projects qualified, but not all of them are going to qualify.
Ms. Heminger, you have some comments?
Seem to just be having trouble with the microphone. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to follow up on what Director McKay said, the limitations that he is detailing, they have to encompass the qualified census tracts, not just census tracts, but qualified census tracts. Another limitation is that we provide a grant to a community that is 185% below federal poverty lines. And that means that a household or a family or a community, they would have to have a median household income of $40,626 a month. Another limitation that is in place.
A month or a year?
Oh, a year, excuse me. Thank you, Representative Larson. And then the other limitation that we are faced with is we can provide things to places on tribal land or tribal reservations. And those are some of the limitations that we are subject to. To follow up on some of the advancements, the State Budget Department and Clifton Larson Allen has been working with directly with the state budget, or excuse me, the state park team to develop a better application to be able to get these applicants into these specific limited categories so that we can draw down on that 24 million that was appropriated to that department.
Excellent. Yeah. Representative Larson?
And so what about if the application is rural? How do you base it on annual income?
We would use the census data, or excuse me, it's the Census Bureau data online. That is what we're using to directly drill in to find out those specific communities. For rural communities, we're like Wright, Wyoming, or Lander, Wyoming. We would just drill in and use that Census Bureau data feature to be able to determine the median household income.
Rural, I was thinking not in a community.
If we do not have data on the Census Bureau website, it would be hard for us to validate.
Thank you.
Can we use antelope? Just kidding. All right, further questions from the committee? All right, seeing none. Any final comments before we close out this topic? We're about out of time.
Madam Chairwoman, I'll just highlight that if in your packet, if you go through the rest of the slides, it does detail some of the information about the successful competitive grants in IIJA that we've won. There's some good news in there. And so, if you've been interested in broadband, if you've been interested in carbon capture, we're one of the leaders related to the attracting dollars and getting it spent with OGCC and the abandoned and plugging well program. So we've got some great things happening out there. It's most of it's detailed there. So if you need any more information about kind of what we've secured so far, or if you ever want to sit down and go through kind of the additional programs that we're waiting for, and that we could apply for when they open up, Mr. Noel and I are available anytime you've got questions.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Any questions? Senator Guru.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Rennie, Mr. McKay, sorry. How, is this new guidance evolves, how are you? I know I hear what Mr. Hibbard was saying about working with the communities, but continuing outreach to make sure that everyone, whether it's local government entities, I know they're plugged in, and most of what I would call the usual suspects, the hospitals, those boards and stuff, they're all connected, but making sure that we have that broad brush out there to anyone that may want to be able to take advantage of this, whether it's a small district, out there, improvement district or something that may be eligible. How are we working with that? How does that, and how can we help if you need help with it?
Madam Chairwoman, thank you. Great question. And just to highlight some of the great work of the kind of bigger Wyoming team is Governor Gordon worked with our U.S. senators recently and held a grant summit in Sheridan. And that was funded thanks to the dollars you put in place. And that event was sold out within seconds, or every spot was taken up very quickly. And so we reached a lot of communities with that summit. And what we found is that that's probably needs to just be the first of many. And so we're now moving ahead to do more of that, and then kind of stepping it so you can enter a process and end up with a master's degree in grant work to help build up that capacity as we go around through this into the future. But certainly it really would help if you all let your communities know that we're really trying to hit another gear with this. And so please have them be in touch with our office so we can get them. We have an application process now set up for those who want to seek the matching funds. But we are trying to do as much outreach as we can. But right now this is focused on the local or state political subdivisions. So all of them are the ones that are eligible, but we're trying our best to get the word out there, and anything you can do helps.
Dr. Hibbard.
Madam Chairwoman, we're also paying very close attention with updated Treasury guidance for redeployment. I've had to be the aunt at the picnic in different places over the last year to say that this does not qualify. But believe me, as soon as we get a flexibility that where we think we can go that direction, you'll be hearing from me so that I can unwind those aunt at the picnic comments.
Senator Guru,
Just-
running out of time.
I know, just to follow up, yeah, be sure and let us know, because we say we know those time slips away, and all of a sudden we don't want to, I know how this, could work out where you just get to the end and then there's like a big rush to the window. And, so just keep us informed of what we can do towards that end to help. So
Madam
thank you.
Chairman, we check repeatedly every day for that guidance. We are desperate for it.
Thank you. Any public comment on this topic? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed, and so is the topic. Thank you for being here. Sounds like great work is underway. The time is 4:10. So we'll go ahead and start critical infrastructure updates. I see Director Budd is here from the Office of Homeland Security. Welcome, Director Budd.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman. Lynn Budd, I'm the Director of the Office of Homeland Security, as well as Emergency Management and the Governor's Homeland Security Advisor. And let me get this off. One moment.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Sherwood really appreciates it if I tell a dad joke. So this
we would
seems
sure
to be
appreciate that.
appropriate. I can fill the time.
Please do.
Madam Chairwoman, do you know the appropriate award to give to a dentist? A little plaque.
Thank you so much, Director McKay.
Whoa. And I gave him the mic.
Thank you. Thanks for that save.
Save us, Director Budd, save us.
Okay, I'm going to go through, with your permission, a real quick presentation with regard to the Office of Homeland Security to make sure that we're all kind of level set as to what we do, and then we'll move into how that relates to critical infrastructure. Down, of course. Yeah. Okay, it isn't working. You guys all have it in your packet as well. I'm going to go ahead for the sake of time and keep moving, see if we can get this going, but
You're okay, and we have time.
okay.
So,
All right. So just a real quick overview with regard to our office. We are a office within the governor's office. The director and the deputy director are appointed. We have 20 full-time positions, including the two of us. By the way, this is Deputy Director George Schniken. And our budget is on the screen for your viewing as well. You will notice that currently our entire general funds budget is about 8.5% of our budget. The rest is mostly federal funding, grant dollars, which as we are dependent on the whims of Congress, that makes us a little bit vulnerable to continuity for our organization. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is the creation, the Wyoming Homeland Security Act that created our organization in 2004, our agency in 2004. At that time, the Homeland Security Mission was added to the Emergency Management Mission. And it also added legislation to require political subdivisions to designate a Homeland Security Coordinator. So there are 23 of those, some very part-time, some full-time, depending on the day, 1 to 2 tribal and 5 municipalities at this point in time. The counties are supported through pass-through funds, federal grants from our office, which is a 50-50 matching grant. This is the great definition of Homeland Security. It's quite detailed. This gives us, in a nutshell, we support local jurisdictions and state agencies through the coordination of state and federal resources. Basically, anything that has to do with the safety, economic security of the state, all of that goes into what we do. We do that through our next mission areas, which are prevention, which is preparedness, response. We talk about blue sky and gray sky. There are things that we do on a daily basis, like grant funding and planning and exercise, that are called the blue sky activities. The gray sky activities will be, just as it sounds, when we have a bad day in our state, whether that is due to a natural event, a technological event, or a human-caused event. There is an emergency management cycle. So we talk about left of boom and right of boom. Boom is just the event that happens. Left of boom is all the planning and preparedness activities that we go through. And then, of course, boom is whatever happens, again, natural, technological, or human caused. Right of boom is the recovery and the mitigation. Mitigation in our world means reducing the consequences of a future disaster. It is said that for every dollar spent in a mitigation is $6 is saved in response. So that's just the cycle we go through. The next slide gives you actual pictures of events that have occurred in the state of Wyoming. Tornado, flooding, of course, that's the town of Lusk, and wildfires. We are not managing wildfires. We do support the Division of Forestry through communications and other assets. In all of these events, our goal is to protect the critical infrastructure that support communities. It's vital to the national security, public health and safety, and economic vitality of the state. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between command and coordination. All events start and end at the local level, usually with an incident command post. Then as that event becomes more complex, a community may move into a situation where they have an emergency operations center that's coordinating all of the events at the local level. When a community runs out of resources, then they generally declare an emergency and come to the state to provide resources for them. If we are actively supporting multiple counties, then we do that with pulling in our state and federal partners into the State Response Coordination Center. And then one of the positions I'll talk about later, which is our critical infrastructure position, is a key liaison to public and private sector partners in that area as well. We take a look at and evaluate and communicate the severity of a situation based on the lifelines. This defines our response priorities. Where are we going to put our resources? How are we going to take care of the communities? This is an indicator to us exactly how we're doing. We do this in all of our reporting, including up to FEMA, so that they can have an idea how we're doing as a state and whether or not they may need to provide resources for us. All right, let's get into critical infrastructure and key resources. So I've given you kind of a baseline on our mission. That there are 16 different sectors of critical infrastructure that are all interconnected, and they also are connected, of course, to the lifelines. Those things are vital to the state's security, again, public health and safety, and this also does include the cybersecurity space. This is another view of that critical, of those 16 different sectors. In your packets, you also received the listing of the different 16 sectors along with the subsectors that are part of the definition of critical infrastructure. These were defined with the National Infrastructure Protection Plan in 2013. We currently have one position that is supporting us with the protection of the critical infrastructure, all 16 sectors, and that also now includes cybersecurity. Most of the infrastructure is owned with the private sector, and so development of those partnerships is really key to the relationships that we can have with them and make sure that we're doing our best to protect them. And just a heads up, we will be looking at, because this is the theme of the day, adding an additional position to our office to support critical infrastructure with a specific emphasis on the energy sector, as that is one of the most important things that we as a state provide to other states, of course, is our energy. Next, that's just a very complicated slide to talk about all of the interconnectedness with critical infrastructure, making sure that you understand that everything is connected, and there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we understand how to protect that. Next slide. We go through similar to the emergency management cycle. Information is gathered on threats and risks to critical infrastructure. Resources are prioritized and programs are implemented to address those risks. Then we measure the effectiveness of those procedures and we move into the feedback loop and address any lessons learned and get better and better as we move along. One of the big tools, especially with regard to evaluating threats to critical infrastructure is the Fusion Center. That's the Wyoming Information Analysis Team that resides within the Division of Criminal Investigation. Fusion Centers were created after 9/11 due to the failure of information sharing prior to 9/11, which may have been able to prevent the event. Wyoming was the last state to receive a Fusion Center. It's about 6 years old now, and so still a very young Fusion Center. It's meant to be a physical place where state, federal, and local partners can work together to put together the best intelligence possible for the safety and security of the state. So it includes state, federal, local partners. So threat evaluation and information sharing. Fusion centers conduct analysis and facilitate information sharing, assisting law enforcement and other homeland security partners in preventing, protecting against, and responding to crime and terrorism. It's a shared commitment between the federal government, state government, local government, and private industry to share that information and do the best we can to make sure that we can protect that. I think that's it on that side. Oh, well, at the bottom of the slide there, one of the things that actually is occurring today is a threat liaison officer course. That is a course put on by the Fusion Center folks, including our office, whereby individual citizens, mostly law enforcement and emergency responders, are trained to look for different threats in their communities and be able to report those into the Fusion Center. We also have, which I don't think I have on, I have at the very bottom, on this slide, the See Something, Say Something program. You'll see those posters around different places. That phone number on that poster actually goes to our 24/7 duty officer, where we collect the information and then funnel that back into the Fusion Center. You can think of the Fusion Center as a place where you can take bunches of little pieces of a puzzle, put them all together, and all of a sudden they create a picture that you wouldn't have been able to see if you only had that one piece of information. As the question came up earlier today with regard to the cyber assistance response effort and the executive order, which was also in your packets, the Office of Homeland Security, because this is kind of what we do, is coordinate. We are the lead agency to coordinate the CARE team, and that includes several state agency partners, mainly ETS, the computer crimes team at DCI, the team at the Wyatt, the National Guard, also federal agencies. We bring them in to advise and assist with when there is a response for a cyber incident, FBI, DHS, Intelligence and Analysis, as well as CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. So what happens when we have a critical infrastructure partner, say hospital, water treatment facility, somebody that calls and says, we've been hit. We take in all of the information. We have an intake form. We share that information with our partners on the care team as to what has actually happened. We talk to the critical infrastructure partner about whether or not they feel comfortable bringing in federal partners to advise and assist. If they're good with that, then we will bring them in to also advise and assist. And the ETS mostly works through assisting those people to go through the recovery process, figure out what the problem is, how can we assist? Maybe it's technical advice, maybe it's software, maybe it's hardware, different things to help bring that piece of critical infrastructure back online. This is also a similar process on the state network where we bring the team together if we have an agency or a website or something that's been hit by some sort of cyber attack. We'll bring the team together and evaluate the situation and make sure that we can take care of that and get that state agency back online as well. And finally, just as a quick summary, we essentially coordinate the whole of state response to threats and hazards. And we kind of think of ourselves as the subject matter expert for subject matter experts. We know about this much, about this many things. Basically, we know who to call. We know who is the expert, and our job is to help them be able to solve the problem, and we support them in any way we can. We also lead the left of boom readiness portion of the state, like we talked about planning and exercise and training. So the position that we currently have that works with critical infrastructure is also the cybersecurity position in our office, and they're focusing on integration with the Wyoming information analysis team and provide that time to them and that expertise to them with regard to critical infrastructure. Okay. And I think that's my very quick presentation. And I know we're at the very end of your day, so I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Director Budd. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Director Budd. So could you give us a little guidance on critical infrastructure, because you're defining what it is from a federal perspective. We've failed to do that thus far, I believe, in statute in the state level. We've had a couple of critical infrastructure bills that have not passed. Does that cause us any problems, or can we just rely on what the federal folks are saying is critical infrastructure? And if that's the case, what does that allow our respective entities, whether it be a municipality with water or a private entity that may be protecting pipelines or power plants or whatever, to do?
Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, I don't believe we need to define critical infrastructure any further. As you see in your handout, there's a lot of subsectors already defined. I think the definition is out there and it does us a good service. It allows us to just say, these are the important things to the life and safety of our citizens and our residents of our state. It's more of a guideline to help you think through it. Like we were talking about the lifelines. What are the things that we need to really focus on in the state and protect, and know that if something happens to that particular piece of critical infrastructure, the cascading effects that would be happening, and how do we deal with that and make sure that we can recover from that as quickly as possible.
Follow up, Madam Chairman.
Yes, follow up.
So then how do we, I was looking for a slide that caught my attention that said you help harden or to help a security plan and program, county, municipal. How are you getting the word out to maybe the non-governmental entities that have critical infrastructure to let them know what is available and whom they could contact, and this, do they even know we exist?
Director. Madam Chairman, Representative Larson, I hope they do. No, that's essentially the desire and the goal and the duty of that critical infrastructure position within our office is to to work through those partnerships with the private sector. There are also tools at the federal level, partnerships that are called ISACs, Information Sharing and Analysis Centers. So there, for instance, one newsletter that are information that I get, bulletins, probably 3 or 4 a day, is the electric ISAC. So those sectors also share information amongst themselves. How do we help them? We can help them with grant funds. We can help them with planning. We can help them by sharing threats that we're aware of so that they can be prepared to defend against those threats. Lots of partnerships, lots of time, lots of trust to be developed. The private sector, of course, especially with regard to cybersecurity, really doesn't want to admit that something went wrong. In trying to normalize a cybersecurity incident in specifically, it's just another incident. It's just a tornado. It's just a flood. It's something that happened. If we can do a better job of understanding why it happened, then we can help others hopefully defend against that so it won't happen to them.
Representative Stith.
Madam Chairman, Director Budd, what can you tell us about the executive order on the cyber assistance response effort team? As to, it came out just in June of this year. Sometimes executive orders come out when the legislature say fails to act, and I didn't know sort of what the backstory on this was. We had an Appropriations Committee sponsored bill on cybersecurity inside ETS that died an untimely death in the House during the session. But I just wanted to know if there was a reason that this executive order was coming out now instead of a year ago, or not at all.
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Stith, nothing that prompted the executive order at this particular point in time, except that there was a desire by the governor to get that into, I don't know whether codify is the right word or not, but to make sure that that is a recognized committee. We've actually been working in the cybersecurity realm since before 2015. That was our first cyber exercise that we did with critical infrastructure. This team has been working together in developing their guidance, our cyber disruption response plan, our procedures for how we react when there is a cyber attack on critical infrastructure or the state agencies. And maybe Director McKay can say it better than I can, but there was a belief that we wanted to make sure that this particular team was recognized and defined so that we were able to continue the work on it.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Kinski does have a question as well, I believe.
Wonderful. And Senator Kinski is online at this point. So Senator Kinski, if we can bring him on and proceed with your question.
Let me get unmute. I've got 2 questions and I'll take the answer offline. First, you said that you wanted to add a position. Will that be funded by the feds fully or partially? And second, as a follow-up to Representative Larson's question, going back to my mayor days in 2005, there was the city and the county were supposed to have an incident response plan. They were supposed to identify the most likely bad things that could happen and what their response was going to be, who the stakeholders were. And then they were supposed to be holding tabletop exercises. We had a book that had a spine labeled, nothing had been done, but subsequently we remedied that. And that was a requirement. Is that still a requirement for local communities? And are they still participating in tabletop exercises for the most likely kinds of incidents? Thank you.
Director?
Madam Chairman and Senator Kinski, to your first question, we will be asking for general fund money for that position. The reason being is, again, we are only 8.5% general funded at this point in time. I believe that there is a vulnerability in our agency being so highly dependent on federal grants for the running of our agency. And I would like to see us try and use opportunities when we can to create some more stability in our budget to make sure that we can continue to function should Congress decide that they do not want to put money into Homeland Security and emergency management in the future. Every year, every funding cycle, that's a question as to how much money is going into that. In addition, the funds continue to be reduced. When we first were formed in 2004, 2005, that time period, we were getting approximately $17 to $18 million in the Homeland Security grant. We now get 4.5. So those funds are going away. They're reducing. If we we can work through that. We do have our matching grant, which is the Emergency Management Performance Grant. That is a, excuse me, it's a 50-50 matching grant, 50% federal, 50% general fund. But that's how we also support the local jurisdictions. So the more that we have to take out of that grant to support a state position, the less that we're able to pass through to the local level and to support programs at the local level. With regard to the incident response plans, yes, every county and local jurisdiction, well, I would say every county, ones that are funded through the Emergency Management Performance Grant are required to have that emergency response plan of some sort. And tabletop exercises are being done as well as all the way up to full scale exercises. We do have an exercise requirement for them to do, I believe it's 5 exercises a year of some sort, exercising those responses, evaluating those for areas that there may be room for improvement. And then we support them on developing more skills and planning to address those shortfalls.
Thank you, Director. Additional questions for the Director? Director, I always find it helpful when you're telling your story as to the why you exist or why you may be asking for additional money with an actual story, other than the technical PowerPoint, which is helpful. But can you just give us an example of an emergency that the Department of Homeland Security has participated in, perhaps facilitated a response either before or after, and just briefly give us that kind of example?
Yeah, sure. Madam Chairman, of course. One thing that I will just add really quick as an example, and it actually leads back to Senator Kinski's question. We just participated and supported the Vigilant Guard exercise in the state, which involved 9 different counties. Many of them were performing full-scale exercises at the local level. This was in support of the National Guard for them to validate their abilities. And there were over 800 people in the state that participated, and our office organized that exercise in conjunction with the National Guard. So we do a lot with exercises. Our most frequent response, as far as natural disasters are concerned, of course, is flooding. And that would be when a local jurisdiction runs out of resources. We often provide labor either through partnership with the Smoke Busters program with the facility in Newcastle or the National Guard. We also provide other supplies and support to them with personnel at the local level. And then all of the disaster funding also from FEMA runs through our office. So should we get a federal disaster declared, then that funding runs through our office and we distribute that to the local level. As far as more of a Homeland Security response, we have had several cyber incidents in the state that we have responded to and assisted with at hospitals, community colleges, there's been attacks also on our pipeline infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, both physical and cybersecurity attacks. And we just help facilitate getting those experts in there to do the work that they need to do. I always say, put out the fire. They allow them to go put out the fire while we take care of all the other things around it.
And was DHS the first call from those entities? How many people did they call? Particularly those who had a cyber attack. Let's use a hospital or a college as an example. Who did they know to call, or why did they call you?
Madam Chairman, one of the things that we try to work with is our local emergency managers, those local Homeland Security coordinators as defined in statute. We work at the communities to see them as a resource or a touch point for state resources for them. So hopefully they're calling in some cases, they do call those local emergency managers. Sometimes they will call a federal entity that will, whether it's DHS or FBI or CISA, and then they'll bring us back into the circle and figure out what's going on there.
All right, thank you. Any final questions? Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In a general context, do we have a list of known bad actors operating in Wyoming? And is there a mechanism, or are there mechanisms available at the local level for detecting and addressing those We have a way federally, I know, for the, the terrorist sponsored, the sponsors of terror. Do we have a way here in Wyoming to do that?
Madam Chairman,
Director?
Representative Henderson, that is not something that our office does, so I would have to defer to other agencies. We don't keep a list of bad people or things like that. Our job is to identify threats that are consistent, so we can look at the tactics and procedures and be able to communicate those with those critical infrastructure entities so they can be better prepared to defend against them. There's probably folks that are on somebody's list, but I don't have one.
Great.
Yeah. The Fusion Center doesn't keep names either. Yeah. So the Fusion Center, there's very strict regulations as to their information collection, and I would not venture to say exactly how that works, but essentially if there's not a case open on an individual, they cannot collect information on that individual.
What? Let's go back to that. If there's not a case open on an individual, what does it take to have a case open on an individual?
Madam Chairman, I'm getting way out of my comfort zone here, but it would be somebody that we're suspected of a crime, just like any other type of crime. And so they're not, I guess my point is to let people know that the Fusion Center or our office, no state agency, is just collecting information on individuals on a random basis. There has to be a specific reason to collect information on that person.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. With that, any final questions unrelated to my questions? Representative Zwanitzer?
Madam Chairman, for the governor's office at the appropriate time.
Sure.
Just appropriate time?
Yes.
Rennie, I was wanting to go back to how many grant writers does the governor's office have, or how many grant writers does any of the state agencies have?
Madam Chairwoman, zero in the governor's office. So that we have tried to work with the budget department on adding resources at the wider state level. There are definitely agencies that have folks who work on that and as part of their job. We do not have a large team of grant writers in any one agency or across that's what they do full time. So, there are definitely people who have that capacity who do it as part of their job. But that's why I think, the funding for that and getting us an RFP so we can work with a contractor who can support an agency that is either overtaxed if they've got somebody, or if they have no one who does that professionally, they get professional guidance on how to do it better.
Any final questions on this topic? Seeing that the committee is riveted. Thank you for your presentation. We look forward to hearing from you and hearing more about your budget later in this interim. So have a great evening. Public comment? Public comment. All right. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and Committee. My name is Amber Leba. I'm the Vice President of the Greater Cheyenne Chamber of Commerce. My comments will be brief. I'm just here to speak in support of this issue and discussions moving forward. The Chamber, we work with the Air Force very closely, and this continues to be a top priority for them, specifically related to land purchases around critical infrastructure such as military installations. It keeps happening across the country. It has happened in Wyoming. In fact, there was an article just published in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about a $1 billion purchase of land right outside Travis Air Force Base. And it is becoming increasingly concerning to public officials. So it is something that the Chamber stands in support of. And we just ask for your continued discussions on this moving forward. And we're here to help in any way we can. And with that, I can stand with for any questions.
Well, thank you. Recognizing that the chamber represents businesses and that most of these land acquisitions are conducted by businesses, is it the chamber's position to support the identification of who owns those businesses?
Yes, yes, it is definitely one of our priorities. Mhm.
So it's the chamber's position that every owner and every shareholder of a business is identified publicly?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
All right, anything further? All right, any additional public comment? Seeing none, this topic is closed. Committee, do you want to go back to major maintenance?
Madam Chairman.
I just really,
Madam-
we have no bill drafts today.
Right.
So Representative Stitt?
Madam Chairman, I would like to see major maintenance on the agenda for next meeting as well. I don't know that there's a specific bill draft that there would be consensus about right now, but there's enough going on there that I feel like it's worth thinking about. I mean, we've got what appear to be some inconsistent definitions. We have a number of problems that we all identified yesterday, but I'm not sure that there's a specific solution that is gelled yet from my point of view, but I think we should work on something next meeting.
Any additional comments from the committee or discussion or thoughts about where you want to go with this topic? We kind of left it open and circled back with the policy considerations or further discussion that Mr. Richards provided us in that email to us. Seeing that you are disinterested in taking any action on major maintenance at this meeting, we will shut that down. So with that, we will hear from Don, have an overview of the day.
Shut it down for this meeting.
Right. Representative Stitt?
And Madam Chairman, I think the same might be true for the environmental, social, and governance issue. There was no request for a bill draft, nor do I think we have a consensus necessarily here today about that, but to see it on the agenda next meeting so that because I think something, maybe should be.
Thanks for your comments, Representative Stitt. We will certainly prepare the agenda and look forward to all your feedback via email and otherwise instead of today at 4:45 about the preparation of our next agenda item. But
So,
thank you.
yeah, Madam Co-Chair, what my thought was on that is that we would take the substitute bill, which is what basically a House JAC bill that we drafted, and provide that as part of the materials, so that the folks that haven't read it can kind of see what our thought process was when we drafted that bill. And see if we're interested in that as being a JAC bill that would come and address the issues and concerns. It's basically, it takes the first part of that sentence or that paragraph of not what was handed out today, but was provided in our handout materials and recodifies the general concept and more explicit language that everything has to be done to maximize the total returns on the fund, and then basically stops there. And it takes out the penalties, it takes out anything other than that specific phrase, because every time you put in a qualifier or a further definitions or some other component, I think we get further and further down a rabbit hole.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I do have concerns about going further down the rabbit hole, which is why I think it's premature. I know obviously the House Appropriations Committee supports the bill it provided last session a number of months ago. So that's not surprising to me that you still support the House Appropriations bill. Unfortunately, nobody else did, including the treasurer. And so I think that likely will set us up for a rabbit hole situation. But I think we can have further discussions about that as we continue to address the moving target of the treasurer's policy statement that we'll hear more of here in August next month. So I just urge caution on that. Representative Larson?
I just think we kind of need to wait and see what the treasurer's final policy is. I'm hearing that there's this sense that might satisfy the concern that we have. If it does not, then maybe we have that conversation, but I think it's premature to draft anything, but I think we need to follow up and see what policy they do adopt and see if that kind of resolves the problem. Is my thoughts.
Well, thank you. All right, with that, let's go to Mr. Richards and go over our committee updates and directives of the last of today and yesterday.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, as you accurately noted, there were no bill drafts. There were a number of requests from agencies throughout the day. And we will expedite those responses when we receive them. I did want to at least outline what's to come and some of the deliverables going forward, keeping in mind that all of this is subject to approval by the chairs as we move forward. But tentatively, there is a joint meeting of JAC and the Select Committee on Capital Financing and Investments scheduled for Monday, August 28th. It is an afternoon only meeting comprised of 3 hours with one agenda item related to performance compensation. I will note that you have the benefit of an hour or so of education that your colleagues on the Select Cap Finance have yet to receive. They will be receiving the memo that LSO prepared as well as the presentations, but they did not work through that topic in June. That is approximately 3 hours as currently drafted, and the meeting will occur at Jackson Lake Lodge. That is the afternoon preceding the state treasurer's conference, with a reception that evening and the conference the following day. Next, on Wednesday, September 27th, you have a joint meeting with the Joint Education Committee and the JAC to discuss and receive the consultant's report on this year's ECA or external cost adjustment. This meeting is also scheduled for a half day. It is remote only, although we will have, like we always do, a room in the Capitol where members of the public can attend if they so choose. This is a Zoom only meeting as currently advertised. Then you'll recall that your August meeting, tentatively scheduled for Du Bois, was canceled earlier this spring. So your next JAC meeting occurs on Wednesday and Thursday, October 25th and 26th. The topics to be included tentatively on that agenda are the release of the Craig report, as well as carryover topics from today's meeting and yesterday's meeting, which on our list, and of course this is subject to approval by the chairs, includes a revisiting of the pensions issue. And you have 3 full drafts and 1 conceptual framework to discuss on that. Unemployment insurance and workers' comp insurance, and that each of those topics have 1 bill draft, as well as the agency is going to come forward with some specific improvement requests. The potential for continued discussions in the major maintenance area, if the committee so chooses. The potential for continued discussions in the ESG area, if the committee so chooses. You may have completed your work on the performance compensation with your meeting in Jackson. If not, you can continue that discussion. And all of the remaining items are likely to be educational. If you wanted to continue any education on ARPA or updates, an update on the compensation, we will have actual data on the salary increases that became effective on July 1, 2023. Those are the outline and topics you have addressed, at least in education, all of your interim topics assigned to you by Management Council. Some of them, obviously, you've not taken any action or requested any deliverables on, but at least you've gotten a preview of the universe of activities there. With that, I'll, of course, work with the chairs to define that October agenda. And then December 12th and 20th, but through the 20th, budget hearings would commence. I would just note for your own planning purposes, that is 3 days shorter than JAC has ever met in the last 2 decades for the December meeting. So it's compressed there because of some other conflicts. And then you would return tentatively January 8th through the 19th for 2 weeks of wrap up on the budget. Typically, the first week is continued agency hearings and the second week is markup. You will have a number of bills if you so choose to proceed. State capital construction, the budget bill, local government direct distribution, and based on the budget department and governor's office suggestions earlier today, there will be a need for a revised ARPA bill to clean up what I will call those tailings. And the tailings could be tens of millions of dollars. But, those are the primary bills that would appropriate funds in addition to anything that the committee has not completed their interim work on.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Senator Salazar?
I know the Appropriations Committee was originally thinking of the Military Museum in Du Bois for the venue for the August meeting, and obviously that didn't work because of the Jackson. But I did talk to Mr. Starks. He still is very open to having this joint committee come to Du Bois for those of you who haven't seen the museum, and a good spot. So I just leave that open again. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I've not been. Mr. Richards?
My apologies. One correction for any of those individuals listening in. Your joint meeting with JEC on Wednesday, September 27th. The physical location will not be in this building. It will rather be in the Thyra Thompson building in Casper. So if members of the public are looking for a physical location, that facility will accommodate it.
Thank you. All right, with that, Joint Appropriations Committee, I think we wrapped up an incredible first interim meeting for the wonderful and incredible #2 committee. A warm thank you to staff for always being so prepared for all of us and making us look good each time. Thank you to my co-chair and Director Hibbard for all of the wonderful information you provided. Good work, be safe. Look forward to seeing you next month and to see what work we can continue to do for the interim.